Hi, thanks for tuning in to this amazing talk I had with Max, the raid leader of Complexity Limit. His guild has come first or second in 5 of the last 6 races for World First. We have a wide-ranging discussion on sports psychology as it relates to raid leading. You can find time links to the topics in the description of this video, as well as citations for some of the research I mentioned, and links to call in and ask further follow-up questions to my podcast, The Ask Weldon Show. Please subscribe to Max's channel here on YouTube, as he puts out fantastic educational content on leadership in Esport and particulars of elite performance in World of Warcraft. You can subscribe to this channel for more episodes of my podcast, as well as interviews with leaders and performers in professional Esport. The topics we discuss are Max's identity shift from player to 21st man raid leader, how the race for World First is like American football, that good players are not automatically good coaches, why sports psychology in Esport is actually ahead of traditional sport, how gaming houses sometimes get a bad rap, the difference in skill profile between raiders, Mythic Plus players, and PvPers in World of Warcraft, what a raid leader should say to his players who are getting flamed by Twitch chat, Limit's unique guild mindset and why it's like the St. Olaf Choir, how Echo's culture is different from Limit's, how to identify informal roles in a raiding guild, resetting between pulls, why their VOD reviews might be essential to placing highly in the race for World First, if you should walk to the tournament venue, and what they learned about sleep from their 20-hour plus Uldir raid. In this video, I recorded my voice quiet and tuned it up in post-production. Apologies for any mistakes with that. It's due to being in a loud house with lots of kids, so I do it to cut out the background noise. Without further ado, here's Max.
So I think we've talked over Twitter, but I was not familiar with you until you reached out to me, but then I read up on you a little bit, and then you reached out to me. So I guess I would like to just know more about you in general, as far as like your history in esports and like what brought you to here now. What are you passionate about? Stuff like that.
Sure.
If that helps, just for a baseline.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard a little bit of your origin story, so I kind of know like when you started playing WoW and your history as a DPS player and sometimes tank and whatnot. So I guess for myself, I've always played video games, and I was kind of like, I started off my career as a teacher, and then I had a lot of fun doing the working with kids part, but not so much the like teaching math and English part. So I switched to sports coaching, and then I wanted to get better at that. So that's when I went and got my sports sciences degree in sports psychology. And then I had a kid, so I couldn't play video games as much anymore. And that's when I started coaching video games instead of playing them. And it was just like, I was sitting there with the baby in my hands, and I was like trying to play StarCraft 2, and it wasn't working. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I just opened YouTube, and there were like StarCraft 2 tournaments, and I was like, hell yeah, this is great. So then I was watching people who were a lot better than me, and then I saw these people like breaking down on stage sobbing after getting reverse swept, and I was like, they don't have coaches. So yeah, that was in 2012, and then I started.
So real OG esports stuff. Okay.
I think probably not, because OG would be like CS.
Yeah,
1.6. Like back in the 90s and early 2000s.
I think maybe the more like, I would say the OG as far as like in the public eye, like that's when it first started being.
Probably in the West. I think that like in Europe and in Korea, like StarCraft 1 and CS was like really kind of like grassroots strong. I don't think so much in America until like League of Legends and StarCraft 2 came along. But yeah, and I mean, I started playing World of Warcraft the day it came out, because I was really into Warcraft 3. And then I bought it like, what was it, November 24th, 2004, I think was the day it landed in stores.
I couldn't tell. I didn't start playing until 2009. So I'm a bad person.
I was really noob. I wanted to be a paladin. But I read in the beta that priests were OP. So I picked a priest and I cast Inner Fire on myself, and I meleeed my way to 60 solo on mobs. And that took like a year. I didn't realize there were other ways to play, that you were supposed to cast spells. Back then it was a whole new world for me.
Oh yeah.
RPG.
Well, that's actually really interesting. I'm glad to hear the teaching part background, because that's something of mine where I definitely incorporate a lot of this into my stream, and a lot of this into what I do like as like my role now, is that I'm super passionate about teaching. If I wasn't doing this, I would be teaching, in high school or maybe like a little secondary education, but like that is like that is a big passion of mine. So coaching and things like that, and like relating to a new person every time is something that's like really, really important to me. So I think a lot of the ways that you will ask me and the way that you think about the way things are done right now and how they could be better is something that I've probably thought about a lot before, which is good. And then also that I have like maybe my own takes on it from like applying it to how we perform, right?
That was actually one of my first questions. I was thinking about like your identity as a raid leader. And I was just wondering, like, I wonder if you see yourself more as a coach or as a captain or as like a benched DPS player. Like how did your identity transition when you swap to that role? Because it seems to fit you like a glove. And so I thought it must be that you just see yourself as like more like a coach then.
Well, definitely. I think it's weird. Like in the position I'm at now, I've never had to have a more like fully fleshed out opinion on the game, like every single class and spec and what they do and why they can do it, and what positions you can put them in to like best fit their skill set. But I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think the whole like 21st man thing was inevitable in WoW raiding just because there's so much going on in a raid at once that can be, a lot of it can be micromanaged by one person. And then obviously you can do it while playing the game. It's just, you're taxing yourself. You're being, X percent of a player, 80, 90% of how good you can be as a player, right. And then you're only doing, 70 to 80% of the what is capable of a full raid leader in World of Warcraft if you strip off the tax of having to play. So it just allows you to bring someone in the raid at 100% and you to be outside the raid with, POVs on multiple monitors and all the information you need available to you for you to perform at 100%.
I mean, they dabbled with that in other esports, right? Like there was this moment in Counter-Strike when there was like outside shot calling. And it was even discussed at Riot about like sixth person in the comms in League of Legends. But they were just like, no, they just tried to mimic traditional sport where like in European football, like all of the leadership has to happen on the field. It's like part of the skill expression of the players is like that on the fly kind of like calling, which I guess in American football, we went more like the world first rating route where we just have like these like offensive coordinators
that are in the quarterback's helmet. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. That's something that I find really interesting because I think it's definitely different too in a lot of ways where you're looking at 5-man things, like adding a sixth person to manage 5 people and adding a 21st person to manage 20 people just by sheer amount of numbers is like there's like I've never felt more impactful in our success since stop playing because you can just do so much. But yeah, in League it would. League and CS. I know CS doesn't do it anymore, correct? I know they did it for a while, but that like what it does is, it does minimize the skill expression of the actual players because especially in a game like League, you could call every team fight, every gank, every, you could basically micromanage the entire game. And that does take away from a really good
chunk of the players is to see those patterns under
correct.
Pressure. Like that's what differentiates them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what a top tier jungler does. He knows the like matchup of all the picks in each lane and like their current situation and is going to gank based on exactly what's happening in the moment, right? That is a big part of the skill of being a jungler or just anyone that's playing League.
The best coaches in League are the ones who like transition from pro player to like the coaching position, but then they start to struggle with, I assume, some of the interface issues that you have, which is like once you're not the actual player and you have to give them advice, but they're the ones who are like perceiving that they're better at their role than like you are now because like you've stopped, like you're not actually in the polls, then you have to like change the way that you're talking to the players, I would assume, or at least in League of Legends as a coach, you have to be like, I want you to do this thing, but like I have to recognize you as the expert. And at the same time, I feel like I know better about this, or it's better for the group as a whole. I just imagine that like there was a transition in the way that you had to lead or communicate with the players that you were trying to get to do new things, or is it just totally different because there's so many roles in World of Warcraft that like you never really were the expert when you were even playing with them on the pitch.
Well, so there's a couple things to that. Before I answer the specific WoW question, I think this is something that applies to all sports and all esports, where the very binary decision of having a former really good player be a coach is totally dependent on their personality. I think you could have a really, really good player be a coach, and this has been tried, I'm sure, in esports, but definitely in sports where, some people are just insanely talented. I have people like this in my guild that honestly couldn't even tell you how they're doing what they're doing. They're just nuts. They're just like freaks at the game, right? That exists in every game. Those people are, most likely going to be terrible coaches because they're not very analytical and they don't really know what's going on. They're just nuts, Right. And then you have people that sometimes maybe aren't even the star player, but there's someone who just has a deep fundamental understanding of the game and constantly thinks about ways that they can be improving as a team and stuff like that. Those people alongside a good skill set, because I think a good skill set is actually important. And this is where I'm going to transition into the WoW thing. You have to have been good at what you do in a sense to have the respect of a really good player that you're trying to teach something.
Right. And
I think that's why, I still play in farm. I don't have to play in farm, but I think it's really important that like right now, most of the people in the guild have raided with me. They know I'm good at the game.
But when you have what people coming in,
exactly what I'm terrified of is the guild looking a lot different in 2 years. If I remove myself now from playing, how is a really talented player we pick up a year and a half from now going to respect the decisions that I'm making? Right?
Well, they have that you can at least 1v1 all of them in duels. Then that's
yeah, exactly.
That's what happens in the League of Legends pitch. Is like the coach that wants to dominate the players will just 1v1 them. It's a completely different game than the 5v5 game, but at least it starts to garner respect when they realize it's tough to beat them.
Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of how smart you are, how innovative you are, how even just natural leadership skills, which I think really translates a lot into positions like that on just on a morale level. As far as objective game decisions, and if you're the person kind of determining the pitchfork of your strategy, they have to have some kind of baseline respect for you, or that just never goes the right way. And you also have to be likable, I think, too. Even if you're the smartest person and you're sick at the game, but you're just not a very likable person, I think that goes a long way. If you're working a regular job and you don't like your boss, you're just every time he tells you to do something, you're just going to look at it a different way.
Going back to the original question, which is how did I get into this? I think I started with the avenue of sports psychology because that's what my degree ended up being in. I was in sport and exercise psychology with a focus on the development of youth through sport, which is youth development. Why do we do youth sport, for example? Why do we have a bunch of kids running around and playing soccer? It's not so that they can eventually go pro or get scholarships. At least most of them won't. So there's this idea that sport develops social and emotional skills or transferable skills that then they'll use other places, or at least fitness. And I thought that when I started looking at esport, there's so much of sports science transfers directly over to competitive gaming. Maybe not the physical fitness part, but even that, it's hard to maintain a strong long career in whatever competitive game you're doing unless you're actually taking care of your body. I think that League of Legends started out with a lot of people who were less healthy, maybe a little bit more of the gamer profile, and now if you look at them, most teams look kind of like European football teams, or there's a bunch of more fit people in the scene, just because they're oh, you have to train 8 hours a day in these scrimmages. And I think that the more people that are playing on the ladder and the more people that are trying to vie for your spot, the more athletic, I would say, the esport actually gets. But sports psychology has... It's the more that physical fitness matters in traditional sport, the less sports psychology does. If you're just faster on the soccer pitch, it doesn't matter if the other person has more mental will, but except in the long run, right, of actually cheating. But the more that mental the game is, let's say tennis, the more important each point and reset is, the larger the realm of mental tools and capabilities that you need to muster yourself for every pull. Or every serve. And then I think that World of Warcraft, or esports in general, but World of Warcraft and even raiding in specific, takes that to the extreme where the mental aspect is actually becomes almost all of it, because the only fitness we have is the coordination of our fingers. And so you can be slightly faster than somebody else, but a lot of that is just genetics, your reflex speed and your training. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of it is all how well can you focus. And so when I started doing sports psychology training one-on-one in esport, I just started winning a lot because no other teams were doing it back then. And now, a lot of teams in League all have sports psychology trainers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was the first person I met. Actually, when I I didn't know how much this was a thing because it was available. It is available to us at Complexity, but when I moved to California, my stuff wasn't here for 3 weeks. So Team Liquid and 100 Thieves both allowed me to stream out of their facilities because my computer wasn't here yet. And the second person I met at both facilities was their sports psychology coach. Like he's just there front and center, part of the main thing. Just like, so yeah, it's a very big, I mean, it's smartly too, right? Like obviously that's very important.
Yeah, it's nice because in traditional sport, like usually it goes like the basketball coach sends the player off to this office downtown where there's like a couch and you go in and the person's in a suit and you sit down and you lean back and you like talk about your feelings. But that's not really how it's best applied. I think in the Rio Olympics, there was a lot of a revolution in the field of sports psychology where like, especially in the North American sports, they started integrating the sports psychologist with the actual team. So like in the men's volleyball, the guy was there like in the training and on the pitch and at the actual event and like talking to people between points, And I think that Esport went directly to that. They were just like, we just want you integrated with when do they wake up? How do they train? What's the training environment look like? Like all these little things that you can nuance. It's been built up from the beginning. So it's kind of nice that we started, I think probably actually we are ahead of traditional sport in how it is that we use sports psychology, like in esport, like by far. I think
that's actually really interesting because I feel like in so many other ways, it's obviously due to the fact that all traditional sports have been along much longer. We're almost tracing in the footsteps of them in a lot of ways, like salary structure, how the seasons are run, stuff like that. The actual implementation of like city-based teams for obviously, easier fan base to capture. Like I feel like esports has just been slowly going the sports route just over a long period of time. So it's actually interesting to know that like esports was the person to kind of like get the jump on that. Because what you just described at the Rio Olympics has been what League and CS teams have been doing for years now, right?
Yeah. I think even a little bit with gaming houses. Like I know they get a bad rap, but we can see now that there's these really funded esports teams that went from gaming houses to the next step, which is like everybody goes back into their original apartments and you have a facility. But what we saw was across the board, like a lot of performance drop. The teams that were still in gaming houses, like C9 and TSM, they were dominating for seasons because they were still living together and really grinding out all that conflict and like just connected, like moment to moment, every single meal, their lives were just in sync. And I think that they were copying traditional sports, saying, "Oh, we need a facility and we need to get everybody, in their own apartment, paying their own bills and kind of like mature up." But actually, it just distracted them from being good players. They had to deal with all this other stuff that previously was off their plate. And so I think that even in that way, esport. I mean, obviously, gaming houses come with their own problems, and maybe the correct thing is like a dormitory style with like a training facility, like somewhere in between, like colleges do. But yeah, I think that there's definitely there's a couple ways in which esport has pushed the boundaries way ahead of where traditional sport is, and they're playing catch up.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I took a break from League last fall and I started playing World of Warcraft again. So I guess the last time I played was TBC, maybe a little bit in Wrath. And I immediately noticed that there's 3 big sports now in World of Warcraft. There's Mythic Plus and PvP, and then the race for World First. And I feel like sports psychology categorizes those very differently in terms of how it is that you would best train them and what kind of person would best compete in them. So I'm really curious if like what your perception is of the difference between like these different sports and I know that you had this like controversial statement during the last Great Push where you said something about top tier raiders being able to walk onto Mythic Plus better than the live key pushers. And that kind of got
That's not exactly what I said, but
it got
yeah,
misconstrued. But basically, the gist was like, if our raiders took it seriously, like live key pushers would.
I didn't say
skill set, right? So I wanted to clear the air. Like, what is your perception of the skill profile for, like, rating versus M plus, MDI M plus versus like PvP? Are they the same in your perception, or do you think that like the skills overlap enough that it's just like an easy transition, or is like PvP in just a totally different camp?
So that's a really, really good question. So we'll talk about Mythic Plus and PvE and Mythic Plus and rating in a second. PvP is totally and completely different. Well, actually, that's not really true. So, like, of the players that I've had in my guild that are exceptional at PvP, I have people who've won BlizzCon in my guild, and I have people who, get 2100 in the first week if they need to for gear in my guild, and that's the only time they PvP, is just a means to an end to get more gear for PvE. In fact, that's most of our players. The people in my guild that I've seen that are at the very highest level in WoW rating, they all know about the same in PvP. They know how to maximize their abilities. They know how to get a good, trap on a healer. They know how to CC. They know their whole class inside and out because they're that good at their class. But the thing they lack is the knowledge of everyone else. So much of PvP is understanding exactly how every other class in the game wants to play their game. So you can either counter it or be aware to not get trapped into what they want you to do. So that is the thing that is obviously from a very talented player. Let's just say you have like a Moonkin player, and he's like really, 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 really good, but like he's never known what like a setup looks like in PvP. So, and he's never had to. So, I mean, they're super good about the game. In my opinion, in WoW, if you took any of the top players from my guild or Echo specifically, and you were to they were to actually play the other game mode, and they would be passionate about it, very importantly, and they actually took the time to learn all that stuff, I think they'd be extremely good. In fact, the ones, and the sample size of that is every single one that is insanely good at it. And some of them, again, have been pro PvPers for a long time. But it is just so different because the knowledge base is different. Now, with Mythic Plus and rating, that is not true. Pretty much in both scenarios, the preparation is different, and the resources available to top tier Mythic Plus teams and top tier raid teams are nowhere near comparable because the viewership and the money and sponsorship is just on a completely different level. But the actual skill set, it's the same skill set. In fact, I think that's a very common misconception among Mythic Plus players, is that Mythic Plus and rating are a different skill set. It's a different knowledge base. Like if you do, right, Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, whatever, 100 times, you're going to know all the little intricacies of what you do and why, and you're going to memorize where your damage cooldowns are best used and stuff like that. But it's same thing in raiding.
Optimization of cooldown and yeah, the knowledge of what needs to be mitigated as far as damage and where to stand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's a knowledge based difference, but in reality, when you're raiding and when you're doing Mythic Plus, you as a player, if you're seeing them both for the first time, a raid boss for the first time in testing or on live, or a Mythic Plus dungeon in beta the first time you see it, all you're doing is PvEing what's in front of you. That never changes. There are bosses that are almost exactly like a bunch of Mythic Plus pulls, like Stone Legion Generals, and there are bosses in dungeons that you would play just like a single target boss. How you use your defensives, your utility, and how you do damage is fundamentally exactly the same. It's just in dungeons, it's much more likely to be a set of ads.
I was thinking about this from the skill transfer perspective, because at work I'm making a bunch of different rubrics of what the skills are in each particular esport, and I'll say from the sports psychology angle, but actually it's probably the sports sciences angle, because sports psychology is probably, it's divided into two sides of the field, right? There's the side of the field that's doing research in sports sciences department, and there's the side of the field that's just doing training for elite athletes mainly, or elite performers. I would say now it's more towards performance psychology, because everybody has realized that the same thing for public speaking and serving a tennis ball or shooting in the Olympics is the same in the brain. So it's moving towards performance psychology, but on the research angle, I think that the difference between sports psychology and sport neuroscience is this fields need to be integrated, and I'll explain it in a physical term, or in a physical example. There's this portion of the brain called the ACC, which stands for anterior cingulate cortex, and when you are in the zone, let's say in a Sylvanas pull, learning, and you make a mistake, this part of your brain will fire up for about 10 or 15 seconds electrically, and then it will just come back down to its basis, its standard level of electrical activity. And the theory is that essentially what's happening is it's noticing the mistake, and it's stimulating the release of neurotransmitters that are going to allow you to kind of change the pattern to motor mapping that you would need to do to improve that mistake, or putting a bookmark there maybe, wherein then you're going to rehearse it when you're sleeping, the correct motor movement. and this is, you would say as well, this is the neuroscience realm. So this is like sports neuroscience. It doesn't have anything to do with sports psychology. But if the same person is, let's say, streaming or being judged or being watched by a bunch of people with an audience, and they feel self-conscious, when they make that mistake, that portion of their brain will fire
amplified
up really high.
Yeah.
And then for a couple seconds, then it will drop really low, and then it won't function at all. So the act of like actually learning like how to correct mistakes like in this rapid, like in the zone mode has to do with your mindset as much as like the chemicals of what's happening in the brain. So I think that like from the sports sciences perspective, if I was going to look at like a raider and say like, okay, who would transfer over to PvP? I would probably look at people who were already doing stuff that they would mechanically need to do in PvP that would make them like better or more accurate. That is the people who are targeting with their mouse cursor by clicking everything very accurately instead of people who are tab targeting regularly, or people who are like, when they're doing their movement, are incredibly precise about their view angle instead of the ones who are like, they know where everything is, so they don't control their view angle as accurately, let's say.
Yeah.
So I think that like those skills of preparation would transfer over like really readily to PvP. And then you'd have raiders who like never do that at all, but they're really excellent at managing their cooldowns, and they would have to learn a lot more in PvP because it's, like you said, there's these like physical differences, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And that also, I'm really glad you brought up one part in the middle of that, where you use the example of how a raider might react to a mistake, it being streamed to a lot of people. That was actually the first hurdle we had to jump over as a guild that was streaming the world first race, because that's something you'd never experienced before. You know, it's totally different when you're solving a problem in a group of 20 to 25 people and you're like, okay, this needs to be fixed. But like the difference between that and like, you know, obviously a completely, you know, if you were to average out arena. Yeah, if you were to average out Twitch chat's, you know, understanding of high-end rating, you can have someone like dying on purpose to sack a mechanic. Like they're supposed to die, but they're all still going to spam fucking Keck W. That guy sucks. What are you doing? And you know, if you read that enough, you know, that can affect you. So I think that's something where basically we have to just hide it now. You just have to hide your Twitch chat because the mental highs, the dopamine hit of everyone spamming Pog when you do something cool is infinitely less effective than how bad it can be when someone's laughing at you or saying you're bad, right?
So how did you handle that? Did you guys have to have like talks off stream as a team about this, or did it just like you just devolve the tools?
Well, because there was never any clear-cut thing where someone after a raid tier was like, hey guys, sorry I tilted this night because I read something in stream chat, it upset me, right? Like no one was able to come to... Yeah, no, exactly. It was more like I noticed it and I just told everyone like, look, like who cares what anyone else thinks? Just do that. And also if it affects you, just, you know, don't stream your POV or don't look at just Twitch chat. Like it's something that people just kind of had to get over. One of the weird things about streaming the raid.
Well, that's exactly what I would recommend to a coach to say is like, you give them the like reassurance that like, and the inner team, like trust them, and then they can just like laugh it off, you know? It's if they don't have the communication from you that you like, you know what you're doing and like.
Have you watched us progress at all?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
The last 2 tiers.
Yeah, we have like I think a pretty unique guild mindset kind of thing, and I wonder how similar it is to other sports. So a couple of things that I'm really proud of with us is there's never any defending of mistakes, like or not being able to admit to mistakes. I feel like that's something that is like a legit cancer, and it's very hard to control.
That totally comes from like leadership and like the best people in the guild.
Yep. Lead by example with that.
Agreeing to lead by example of like admitting mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. Because like if you look in another guild and you see, or another like a team, if you watch a league team or some other team where you notice that like none of their players are willing to like move past something that happened and just keep going, that's usually because their best player or their most influential emotional heartbeat of their team is like that. If your best player or best players are like that, every new person with talent that joins is going to adopt that philosophy. So it actually used to be a problem in our guild. And then we seriously addressed, it was a long time, like 5 years ago, but like ever since then, it's just been perfect with that. Like everyone is fully okay with admitting that I actually
noticed that as one of the first differences I saw between your stream echoes was like the cultural difference in like how people were talking about their mistakes like right away. And it made me think of there's this choir that my wife was in college at St. Olaf Choir. So this is one of the best choirs in the world.
Yeah, I actually sang choral music all the way through college. So that's a big emphasis of mine. Yeah.
So if you know the St. Olaf Choir, it's like they were invited by President Bush to come sing at the White House. They were invited by the King of Norway to come sing in Norway. And they're like this university that we were at, or this college, has like 16 different choirs, and this is like the top one. And you can get into it, if you try really hard, if you go there, and if you're a vocal performance major. And they have a habit where it's not a habit, it's a rule. When they're in rehearsal and they're singing and somebody makes a mistake, that person raises their hand, like in the middle of the song. And my wife has the story about one time when like somebody didn't do it and the choir director stopped and he was like, okay, I heard a mistake. Somebody didn't raise their hand. And I need to know, is it because you didn't think you made a mistake, or is it because you're embarrassed by the mistake? Because both of those are bad. Like if you made a mistake,
one of them's way more bad though.
Yeah, you didn't know that you made a mistake, and then the person like sheepishly is like, yeah, and he's like, all right, so for a strike, right? But like we don't do that. Like nobody here cares about your face, and saving face or anything. Like we just care that your peers around you, they want to know more that when you mess up than they care about you messing up. Yep. And then everybody was like, oh, and that button clicks, right, in their brain where they're like, okay, so this is like a high-performance environment where everybody just trusts that everybody's good and we're all on the same page, and there's no hierarchy here about like...
There has to be that, what you just said. For there to be the natural willingness to admit every mistake you make and immediately move on, there has to be skill parity. Because if you're rating, let's just use WoW guilds, for example, if you're rating in a guild where... there's 4 or 5 people in your 20-man roster that are just at a totally different skill spectrum than your best players. It's much, much harder for people to admit mistakes when there's already that much happening from a specific set of people, or a larger percentage of people than just like 1 or 2 people. Yeah. And that's the same way in choir, right? So I was a vocal performance major for a few years, so I experienced a lot of things like that, and so that exists in any good choir. It's this, in fact, if you're if you're trying to get a piece to sound correct in choir, it's the same as in a raid where, it's basically creative problem solving. A lot of people relate the Race to World First to speed running. I think it's much more like, it's a much more just how fast you can creatively problem solve something. And with a lot of moving parts. And even if you have really good players, after a poll, if someone doesn't bring up what happened with them and how to change it, it's a 5-minute ordeal from my perspective to look and go see what happened, right? So like the whole choir analogy of raising your hand, if that raising of the hand doesn't happen from the player, there's 2 problems. One, this is maybe the worst thing actually, is that they're afraid to admit it. Because if you have people who are afraid to admit mistakes, you have people that are not going to call out problems because they're afraid it involves them. That's a big problem. And then the second one would be, like you said, arguably just as bad. They don't even know they made the mistake. That's when you have like a conceptual, like you have not taught them the right thing kind of thing. Like you need to be looking out for stuff like that. And that is something that I think we probably do as well as anything, is our working relationship with people in the guild is there's just absolutely no care about that. And it's just because our best players have been like that for a really long time. And you mentioned Echo. Echo, I think, is someone like you would find fascinating. And I think a lot of it is EU culture. There's a bunch of different European countries involved in their guild. They got Turkey, German, Italian,
and there's a
English.
Linguistic thing there too, with like
the way
it's not direct in a second language versus the way that you guys can admit mistakes, like with nuance, and saving face while you're saying it.
Mm-hmm. I think exactly the fact that it's most of their second languages, I think definitely affects that, and also just them culturally. Like, I mean, I've rated actually personally with a lot of people from different cultures. One thing I've noticed with every German I've rated with is that they're noticeably stubborn and extremely direct, and I love that. If you want to get me an analyst, give me a extremely confident German, and I just want to be told exactly how it is at all times immediately. And I think that's the barrier you have to get through as a team, is
That reminds me of my rest in peace, Norm Macdonald. But it reminds me of one of my favorite jokes from him about Germany. He was like, everybody's all worried about these countries going to war, like North Korea and these other small countries. But you know who I'm worried about? I'm worried about Germany, because you look at their history, their track record. They woke up one day and they were like, let's go to war. With who? Well, let's just pick the whole world. And then, and then they did it again. I think that he delivered it a lot better than I did. But yeah, there's something about the mindset of the cockiness and the confidence to be able to do that. Maybe translates.
Yeah, so I've never really thought about the main difference between us, because I think there's just so much different culturally and the background, and just leaders. I think your main leader, not necessarily the person who's making all the decisions, but you're like emotional leader, if that makes sense. The person who, how they're feeling affects everyone else. Like for me in my guild, if I'm tilted in a raid pull, case closed, we're not doing well. Everyone in the group's tilted 100% of the time. It will always happen. There's always someone like that in a group that big. That person in Echo and me could not be any different as far as like who we are and like how we interact with things. Just completely and totally opposite. But the thing is, both groups have had success, and the guild's culture, as you put it, is like the way they operate, communicate with each other, totally different, like completely different, which shows that like there are multiple ways to make it work. It just depends on what your actual thing is. Like our healthy medium is joking. Like if you see our best pulls in WoW, we're actually just cracking up laughing the entire time.
Yeah,
where they exactly, but their zone is different. Their zone is no one speaking full focus, right? So like just seeing how those two things can both be that different and both be successful is fascinating.
They're both neurologically. If we were to look at like, let's say you're like laying in one of those machines, with your head in the magnet that's spinning around, and we were like looking at the actual blood flow or whatever of your brain, and we were trying to say like, is this person in Echo or in Limit? Like when they're doing this pull, I bet despite the external differences, internally it would look very similar. Like that's like an expression of flow state, essentially. Heavy concentration that is fluidly moving from piece of information to piece of information without stopping for judgment or worry, and that is like rapidly trying to like correct and recognize mistakes. I think that So I think in both cases, it's like what you said. It's the same engine that's running underneath, even if the paint's different.
It's just exactly, but I think that's fascinating though. It's like endlessly fascinating that too, and especially like it really is like 20 plus groups of people and 5 are totally different, right? It has like you have so many more personalities at play, so to have the two engines running the same. I was thinking
about that when you said the role, like the emotional leader of the team. I did this activity with early on with teams that I consult with, and it's like a informal team roles mapping, and the team roles that are kind of like more recognized by the scientific research side of sports psychology are mentor. This is like the person who people would go to get advice about maybe the game as well, but also just like things about like
being on a professional team.
Yeah, exactly.
How to go to your first LAN, stuff like that.
Right. You have the enforcer, who is the person who like kind of comes down when it usually from the peer group, right? I'm not talking about like what you said. There's different levels of leadership. There's like the actual like org chart leader, and then there's the socially recognized leader, right? So this would be like at the same peer level. Enforcer is like the person on the team who's like, all right, guys, like focus up. Come on, this is like the 4th time that we've made this mistake. Like I don't want to see it on the next poll. That person who has that voice. There's the nonverbal leaders, who are like the ones that everybody looks to for like what you said, to see how they're feeling about it. They don't really say anything, but that when they're in a good mood, like then everybody's in a good mood. And then there's the spark plug, which is kind of the person who you would say like initiates things. They're the person who's going to say like, hey, let's all go get dinner, or like invite 3 people to go do arenas afterwards to cool down. Who just never start anything. And then there's the verbal leaders. Obviously, that's pretty straightforward. And there's the socialites. I guess the people who essentially socialize a lot more than other people. team players, the people who essentially sacrifice a lot. Sometimes you have to get these people to stop sacrificing. Like their problem is they will sacrifice too much before they will actually look out for themselves. So as you said, like the raid leader, you'll sacrifice some of your personal performance when you're actually playing in order to like lead the team as a whole. And if you do it like too much, then somebody has to be like, hey, dude, you need to stop calling stuff and like focus, be selfish, for a little bit here, or something. That's like the team player's mindset. And then the comedian, who is the person who lightens the atmosphere.
We have a few of those.
There's two of those that we identify, but we don't really like tell teams who they are. And that's the distractor, which is the person who detracts a lot from the point, and the cancer or the malingerer, the person who's like, you always know is going to end up pulling things down and like seeing the negative side of things.
The way you are putting this, like every single term you just used, I immediately identified like 3 or 4 people in our guild that fit that exact role as far as like our team mindset. That's so funny. Just like, I mean, to a T, just like to a T.
There's an activity we do, which maybe I can show this. Like I'm going to try to share my screen in place of my camera, but not show the data here. Probably this is really dangerous. I should probably not do this.
Oh, okay. You want to just wait? No. You want to like just
what I'll do is I'll snip and then I'll share that window. I want to show this map without showing names on it because like obviously I don't.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to like. Here's a. Okay. All right. So now let me see if I can share screen in Discord. No. I don't want to share screen. I want to share window. Right. Here it is. Snip and sketch. All right, I don't know if you can see this thing that I just put up.
You can. Okay, you want me to show it now? I have it hidden.
Yeah. It's,
all right, cool.
It's good. So, I actually don't have your stream pulled up anywhere, so I don't know if it's showing.
All I'm showing is a full screen of the graph you're showing right now.
Okay, yeah. So you can see this is a mapping of like a 5-person team, and this is a very, very defective team. Because you have one person who's like the most dynamic and role-laden person, and they're taking the responsibility for like everything that's happening in the team. And then you have somebody who's like not pulling their weight at all, who's like that quiet kind of like team player willing to sacrifice, but like won't step up. So we would like map out a team like this, or like a 20-person raid team, and you'd be able to see like essentially, and this is all peer defined. So essentially peers take surveys on their other peers and rate them on scales based on like what
is this from a real? You snipped this, but this is from a real team.
This is a real team, yeah. That's why I had to snip out the names. So what we did was like talk to this guy who's taking all the roles and was like, here's your strengths, right? Let's focus on this. And then we went to the people who were the other problem is this fourth person here has no role clarity. So he might think that he's really good at something, but every single person on the team sees him as a different perceives him differently, right? So there's a problem there that like your peers don't see what role you perform on the team, or they all see you differently to different people, which sometimes is bad, sometimes it's fine, but most of the time it's bad.
Is it also bad? Would you say it's bad just in general for that person in the middle to have that much at one time, just in general?
Yeah.
That was my main takeaway because
inefficient.
That was me in this guild 3 years ago. Is I was just too many hats. I was doing too much. I didn't delegate anything. And I feel like now a picture of our guild will be much closer to me being much lower. And I felt like me doing that much was really bad for us. And I think it's helped us a lot to move a lot of it away.
I have this other one that is beautiful where it's like the perfect team. I'm trying to find if I can like find the graph. I actually don't know where I have. Oh, actually, maybe this is it. Yeah. Let's see if I can snip this one and share it. This is a team that we worked on. At first, they had like a really bad setup, and then we did some like activities where we clarified roles and we worked on it, and it turned out to be like this at the end. And then we got ended up going from like 8th place to
your screen ended up being unshared right there. Was that intentional?
Yeah, I closed the thing. So
cool.
I'm going to share this one again. Okay. So here's the fixed one. So you can see here they have like massive role clarity between like everybody has like a couple jobs. One person is like clearly the rookie, right?
Yep.
And then everybody else, like 4 people see the person as the mentor, you know, and they're widely distributed roles. And then this team was functioning like one of those like well-tuned engines, and we went from 8th place all the way to, I think, like made like the wild run in like a few weeks to like 3rd or 4th place.
How do you make this graph? Is this assigned by someone by analyzing the players, or are these players rating the other players?
These are it's players rating the other players. So how do you perceive the person's role like as a team member? Okay, I stopped sharing that. Is my Discord back to normal? I feel like on my screen it has died, actually.
Yeah, Oops. That happens all the time. So, yeah, it's Discord. If you ever use the pop-out feature, the button to stop watching stream or stop streaming and disconnect are the exact same button. It just replaces itself. So I've seen it happen just 100 times where someone turns their stream off and then leaves the call. Like almost, it just happens every time.
This is exactly why I did a channel instead of a call, because I was like, at least if somebody leaves the channel, like it's still there. Just hop back in.
Yep.
Redoing the call. Yeah. So yeah, the technique for doing this is pretty straightforward. You ask, there's like surveys that you use. You ask teammates to rate themselves in terms of like their teammates' roles, the strength or the importance of those roles to the team. So like some roles are more important than others, right? So you rate the impact of the role. Like this person's is 100% this role, but his impact is very low, you know? So he can have huge role clarity, but very little importance to the success of the team. And then you have roles that are like crucially important, like the impact of the team is very, very high. It can be rated as very high. And then like also you can have like role disparity where like everybody sees everybody as somebody who's doing this role and nobody has any perception of who's doing it on the team. And that just tells you that nobody's doing it on the team. And then you interpret it from what you've observed as a practitioner. Like I can see when I come into a team, usually I already know what this is going to look like. And this just kind of clarifies it, you know?
Yeah, that is something where I feel like we've had conversations as leadership talking about people's worth and role to the team, and we have a bunch of ideas similar to someone as an outside practitioner coming in. I feel like I've taken an objective look at our guild, obviously not including myself, and I feel like you have a good idea of someone's worth. Like, I mean, I'll give like I'll just give like one person as an example. Like we have a player named Shakib. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's just like a huge joker, clown, the comedian thing. His factor solely alone in our group's morale, from what you would describe as a comedian sense, while also being a perfect lead by example, never die kind of player. But that's like the end of it. That his impact is so high with only two things, right? And I think we've taken an objective look at like a lot of players in our guild and kind of seen that. But I am really interested in actually doing this in our team now. I think that would be like really, really interesting.
I can send you. It's actually just a Google spreadsheet. I bet I could just send you it. I could.
Yeah, that would be great.
It's like a form. You can send it to everybody, and then it will auto create the chart at the end. Or maybe I created it actually by hand. But anyway, I could just send you the Google form.
Yeah, that would be.
It's really
great.
Fun to have as a coach.
Yep.
Yeah. So part of that was to segue into the question of like how it is that you kind of like nascently, maybe that's the wrong word, but like you probably perceive this already, even though like the science is kind of describing reality here, but you're living reality and you're already doing all this. I was wondering like, have you had situations where you have had to like identify, oh, we need this like role here that we don't have it, or you've had like cancers or malingers that you've had to bench? Like how do you handle the kind of conflict from a practical standpoint of benching a player, or of like telling a team like somebody is not pulling their weight, we need to like have this role more on the team?
That's a really good question. The whole like canceller malignant thing, like that, those people don't really come around very often.
They just don't like get to the top level.
Yeah,
I actually happens more in like guilds below your level, because you get to pick the creme de la creme. Actually,
absolutely, yeah, we get to pick whoever we want. In fact, usually the people we're recruiting from, they're all going to do what we want them to do. We don't even really have a trial rank. If we recruit you, there's a very good chance that we know you're good enough, at least for whatever you do, like maybe in a one-dimensional, one-trick kind of situation. But usually what happens with players like that is the ones that are usually a big problem are ones that can't admit their mistakes in a way, and I feel like if you can't admit your mistakes, you can't learn from them. So even players that are extremely naturally talented, they usually cap out at not the very top level, but a bit under that, because they don't ever allow themselves to get good enough. And that's so usually those types of like really toxic players never really rise to the top of any game that I've seen. Actually, they usually are kind of hard cap below that. We have had people that are really good players and really aren't bad people, but like they get really angry, like frustrated at maybe even their own mistakes, but then they can say, sometimes, when your guild is as emotionally connected as we are, like we're all really, really close. All it takes sometimes is for one person to just say something in the wrong tone, and you can tell that they're not feeling well, one of your like emotional leaders of your team, and that can affect everyone's play for an hour, 2 hours, something like that. To where I have definitely looked away from having people in the raid or at some point in the guild knowing that they could have that negative impact if the positive benefit wasn't high enough. So that's definitely happened. We have people around still that sometimes have really spicy takes, and they, I don't know, they sometimes can cause problems. I'm a little wary of getting rid of them though, because I know that their thought process and their decision making actually usually goes against the grain of mine. But I actually like that.
Yeah,
I think I like to surround myself with.
Dangerous.
Yeah, I like to surround. I would be terrified of getting rid of someone who thinks differently than me, because I feel like they're my failsafe of me making an extremely biased decision, or I want a lot of feedback for stuff like that.
This really high stakes like decision making process of the race for world first, where like one bad assumption or like unaccounted for reality can lead to you prepping the totally wrong thing for this 1 week window when you need to like nail everything. And I can imagine the pressure on what it is that you creatively prepare is pretty high. Like there's a lot riding on people's decisions of like what's going to be like, whether you should do Night Fae or Venthyr, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, just specifically on the note of that play, like I have had a player in my guild for a long time, still is now, that multiple times the officers are just like, oh my God, this guy. But there's been multiple times where we've ended a tier and he's had incredibly fleshed out, thoughtful, insightful feedback. And it's not the way you think, and it's a different way. And it's actually been like really, really helpful. And when you're making decisions, having that one guy who's going to stand up in your 20-man TeamSpeak or Discord and is going to play devil's advocate, and even if it's to an annoying, like every single, like contrarian level every single time, you're at least hearing the other side constantly. And I think
it's
that's
better to coach them to do it more healthily than to try to
remove it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that, So yeah, I think that's really important.
So yeah, sport psychology has a little bit about conflict management, but the basic takeaway is that the perception is that most teams feel like they should be conflict free, but the reality is that conflict is essential in like high performance teams, because if you don't have conflict, it's because people aren't speaking up, saying what they think, or you don't have diverse enough opinions. So I think that like handling conflict is more nuanced. Like there's not a lot of research and practical like this works everywhere advice on like how to handle conflict, but the principles are really straightforward. I think in the sports psychology activities that we do, there's some common ones like hot seat, where you like have one person sit in the middle and then everybody gives them brutal feedback, and then you rotate through, so you have everybody in the hot seat, and it's like a chance for
is that a good idea?
Their laundry. These are kind of ways of like handling teams that aren't doing conflict already well, that just don't have a natural way of handling conflict, right?
Because they have to move over that stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe like as a fun way to kick off a boot camp, like icebreakers or something. Probably a better way is to give everybody a piece of paper with a name on it, and it goes around, and everybody writes 2 things that are really important that person does for them, and 1 thing that they're critical of on the back. And then a person gets like a sheet at the end where they have like everything that they do for their team that everybody relies on. And then on the back, it has everything that they do to like cut down the team. So then they have like, it's kind of like a soft version of the hot seat. But all of that is to just basically say that like teams that don't have conflict, usually that's a problem. And it sounds like,
well, because it's fake,
right?
Right? Like if you have any amount of people larger than like 2 or 3, and there is zero conflict, it's just not visible. It's 100% there. It's like the situation where people are, workplaces, especially new startups, can become like this, where they're like super positive, no toxicity, everything's super positive. But usually what ends up happening is no one gives each other constructive criticism. And, that makes you worse at what you're doing. And humans are going to human, right? Like they're going to feel that way. They're just not going to say it to you and say it to someone else. And then it just promotes a climate where people are saying it behind each other's backs instead of to their faces, right? Like it's going to happen.
One of the biggest bullet points I had on here to talk about was the minute decisions of raid leading and in the moment, like on resets, because I think that like if I was to look at one of the more interesting things that I do is I do mindfulness based cognitive behavioral therapy sports psychology training. I'm not a sports psychologist in that I can't use the term psychologist, but I'm a psychology trainer because I have a master's degree, not a therapy degree. The nuance there, by the way, is that like you can think of psychology as a realm where you treat people who are like deficit and try to bring them up to average or standard. And you can see the realm of psychology where you're taking like normal people and trying to make them awesome. And sports psychology is kind of the field where you're like, we're not as concerned with like the deficit.
Yeah, you don't ever deal with the deficit.
Trying to bring like people who are like injured, let's say, or neurotypical up to neurotypical. It's more like we're trying to take like people who are already awesome and make them awesomer, like percentage increases,
correct,
right?
Yep.
So suffice to say that you can come to that world from 2 different angles. You can come from the sports world, or you can come from the psychology world and getting into sport. So I came from the sport world getting into psychology. So my degree, I just focused on sports psychology, and I never got the therapy degree. So when I say mindfulness-based CBT, that's all to clarify that like I'm not doing actual cognitive behavioral therapy. But one of the things we do is like look at the minute things of like how to reset from a bad pull, or how to reset from like a bad mistake in the game, or like a lot of what I do when I do individual training is like those micro moments and like how to perform in the zone and how to like really rapidly handle mistakes. So what are the techniques that you already use naturally to like help a team reset from a pull and get focused on pull? Do you take how long do you wait between pulls, and what tells you that you're ready to like start the timer, or is that like an in-game decision? And when do you like how do you notice when it is that you need to like give the raid a break, or like when to call it for the night? Because I think that like I have answers for all of these from the sports science perspective, and I would be curious to see like how much merger there is between like what you're instinctively doing and like what the science would say makes sense.
Sure.
'Cause you probably just pick up on it naturally. At the top end, that's like how it works, is like the top end performers in football and European football and like tennis are often like pushing the envelope of what we're kind of researching on the science side as we discover it. So I would imagine that like the crossover here is really strong.
Okay, so there was a lot to that. The very first part would be the in between every pull. So, and this is also something where keep in mind that obviously, this, we haven't come from a sports psychology background or anything like that. So I have just kind of changed the way that this has worked over a long period of time, just based on trial and error. But I think the thing that really matters the most for me right now, the most for us, is the moment you end a pull and something goes wrong, unless it's fully understood exactly what happened, you need to be solving something. So just pulling the boss, it not working, having zero discussion, and pulling again
Go next
is obviously not usually the play unless something is completely understood as to what happened. So if we, I feel like as the morale in our guild and our like energy level is always great if we end a pull in a wipe, but we know what went wrong and we have at least dictated some way of how to fix it. And sometimes it can be really simple. Sometimes one of your best players just messed up, and that's what happened. There's nothing conceptually wrong with the strategy. There's nothing we need to change. Now, if this same person keeps messing up over a long period of time, it might beg the question of like, oh, could we have someone help him with this so this stops happening, kind of thing. That's a totally normal reaction to have, I think. But at least in the meantime, in the interim, sometimes you can just GG go next if it's as simple as, you know what, someone just messed up. Now, that also could be due to fatigue. So something we've also changed over a long period of time is our break schedules. We used to have very inconsistent breaks. And now that we're all at the same event, or most, I think having very consistent breaks that we all take at the same time, and more importantly, step away from your computer, even if you're having WoW discussion, I think is very, very important. And that's something that helps a lot now.
What is your time between breaks?
We wake up at around, depending on daylight savings, about 9 or 10 a.m. We have a lunch break at 1:30 with a 10-minute break, 5-minute break somewhere in between. The 1:30 lunch break is around 30 minutes. We then do a like 10 to 15-minute break before dinner time, which is at 7. That dinner break is usually 45 minutes to an hour, depending on if we're in the lead or not. Which I want to ask you and kind of talk to you about whether the circumstances really matter as far as how long your break should be, because we actually had a long discussion about that this year.
Well, it's interesting because the way that I structure the breaks for league teams is, first of all, from the physical perspective for physical health. So like 45 minutes is how long that your cells can be sedentary before, that is without like electrical stimulus, before they will start to like actually have degradation. There's this really fantastic research coming out of the biological sports sciences faculty in Finland at the University of Jyväskylä, which is actually my alma mater too, by the way. I know the guy who's doing this research, or his laboratory, and they are looking at like mitochondrial degradation. So the mitochondria in the cells, how soon do they start to like suffer from sedentarianism, which is like not moving, right? Not stimulating the muscle or the cell. And 45 minutes is the limit before it starts going down.
So you're saying breaks longer than that are actually detrimental?
No, I'm saying that every 45 minutes, you should stand up from your desk and move your body, or else you're starting to get cellular degradation. But, of course, it's not very much, right? You should, and of course, this is like over a season. If you're doing like a 1-week intensive, we have to win world first kind of thing, like allowances come in, right? So I wouldn't recommend the same thing for a race for world first boot camp as I would for like a 6-month, we train 5 days a week kind of like regular pattern, right?
Yep.
So I would throw all of that out the window, and I would say like, well, okay, so if it's not 45 minutes, we're just going purely on mental. I start from the top end, which is really the only thing that we kind of know about this, is that there's research on what's called decision fatigue, which is the amount of mental resources that a human has in a day to make like critical decisions before they start decision fatigue.
Yep.
We know that this is a thing. It's been researched under a lot of different names. The only really hard data that we have on it is that like humans on average have around 6 hours of like concentration, let's say cumulative. And by the way, you could have a Sylvanas poll where you are like, let's say, playing the game for 10 minutes or 9 minutes or something, but you only expend like 3 minutes of concentration because 6 minutes of it is automated. Like you're not thinking, right? You're just kind of like going through the flow. And then 3 minutes of it is hard. And so I'm not talking about like six minutes of playtime. I'm talking about in the brain 6 minutes.
I get it. Yeah. So we've actually gone through this a lot through trial and error. So this is why we've incorporated more breaks. And this is actually fascinating because I started playing Final Fantasy recently, and it's funny how their progression rates are so much longer than WoW's. And WoW's, we wouldn't dare go longer than 14 or 15 hours in a day unless it was the last day pushing for a kill, because you know how much that is going to hurt you over the week. And also that you don't have 14 plus hours of good attempts in a day.
Right.
You don't. You can't. I mean, the number that I've randomly made up, as it seems for us, in a 14 to 15 hour raid day, we have anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of pulls where everyone is fully focused, where once you start running into pulls where people are becoming decision fatigued. And I ran in, sorry, go ahead.
Behavioral economics standpoint, like I would say that it's the competitive environment that forces reality onto teams. So probably as Final Fantasy gets much more competitive, they'll probably have to like come to grips with reality, and like the best teams that will be consistently winning will be the ones who are starting to like experiment with that and limit it. You know what I mean? Whereas that's already happened in WoW.
It's already happened in WoW. Yeah, exactly. And then and also it's weird. Their raids are a bit different, where the main raids I'm referring to are ones that are for like 7 straight raids. The Savage raids, they were cleared before you slept. So it created a system where you were up sometimes for 16 to like 25 hours. to kill the raids. And then now recently, the last couple raids have been like taking. So if the raid content continues to increase in complexity, and if it ever lasts more than a day, then yes, the guilds that take the rest to where each raiding hour they have is more efficient and they're less tired, they will obviously have better results, assuming you need to sleep at all. But then, it's also weird knowing that, hey, we don't want to be the guild that sleeps and the boss dies, So the going back to the like in between polls thing, I think that's something that Echo and us do very differently. So they take much, much, much more time between polls. We've definitely closed the gap. We used to like chain pull, and over time we've moved away from that as we've learned. Chain pulling is only valuable if you know that you can basically do that the whole day and get the same results. But in reality, if you add 3 to 5 minutes in between every poll, you're not reducing the amount of good polls you have in a day. You're just reducing the amount of total in mostly inefficient polls you have in a day. So making sure you go into every poll with all completely optimized weak auras, everyone's fully on the same page of what's happening, giving yourself some time to fully figure out what you just saw for the first time, which is most of hard mythic progression, and making sure your team fully understands how to deal with it before you pull again, knowing that you are mentally limited in how many good pulls you can have within a day.
Well, I would say that the science that we have would dictate this kind of mix of we know that motor learning at least, where you're seeing a pattern with your eye, you have visual input, you interpret a pattern out of it, and then you have a programmed reaction that goes to your motor cortex where you like choreograph your hands and fingers. Like this is the chain, the esport chain, right? That learning only happens like in the activity. So it's very difficult to like, for example, talk about a mistake afterwards and then the brain learns from it. It has to like, you have to like notice it as it's happening. Remember what I said about the ACC, the thing that fires when you're making a mistake? This is why there are people who can practice like 10 hours a day for like years and never get any better. And even if they know the mistakes they're making and they go afterwards and they identify them, because like your brain has to like see it as it's happening and like fix it then. On the flip side, like you said with chain pulling, if you're just chain pulling and you're not putting these like bookmarks in your head of like things that you're looking for, and like you're prioritizing some things for your brain and saying like this is really important and this is unimportant, then your brain will just not pay attention to the right stuff. Or worse, this is what I explain to the league players a lot. If you're doing solo queue and you're just like spamming games, let's say you make a mistake and you lose the game. Your brain, you can't fool your brain. Your brain knows that like 5 minutes later, you're going to be in a completely different game. You're going to be having another chance. And so it deprioritizes the mistakes that you're making because it doesn't care, because it knows that like 5 seconds later, it's going to be having another chance at this. Whereas on game day, they might play one warm-up game in the morning, and then they like have this like 3-hour wait where they're thinking about this game that they're going to play. Then they play the game. Then they might have this like 8 hours where they don't play any game at all afterwards, where there's like maybe a team dinner, or like they're riding back in the bus, and watching other people's games, or they're just too fed up to even open the computer. And so the brain like puts this very intense like scrutiny and weight on like the actions that happened in that one game, because like it's thinking like, wow, this is really important, because there's all this time beforehand where we were like prepping for it mentally, and all this time afterwards where we're beating ourselves up for it. So like obviously this thing that happened was like really premier. So if you put this space and you like take a deep breath and you say like, okay, this is really important, you can kind of like start to fool the brain into thinking like, okay, this pull matters more than other pulls because we're putting importance to it. And chain pulling kind of reduces that effect. It says that like this is unimportant, and the brain gets used to this like rhythm of like mundane, just kind of like average concentration, instead of like peaks and valleys where like, okay, we're going to peak concentration. Okay, rest now, shake it off. Okay, let's go into the next pull. But we want to convince our brain that it's really important, so that it really notices mistakes here and like tries to fix them. And there's also something to be said for VOD review, because there's really nice research actually coming out of the medical field on doctors, where like, I won't explain the research because it's unimportant, but it's really funny. But they were able to essentially, if you're like able to either visualize the moment when you were playing and making the mistake in your head, and you're able to like then visualize what you would do to not do that, to like fix it. Or if you're watching a VOD, and while you're watching the VOD, you're like activating your motor neurons. So you're like actually saying, okay, well, this is what it felt like to do that, and this is what I will do to like not fix it. You can like capture some of that live play mistake fixing, where like you're actually like putting yourself back into the pull that you just had like back in time, and you're rehearsing it a little bit, and you get some of that learning effect. So I think that like if I was going to analyze what you're doing, I'd say like the trend away from chain pulling is probably really good, because it like raises the importance in the brain of every pull. Make sure that people pay attention to it, which means the brain pays attention to it, which means learning goes up. And then also like any VOD review or imagery that you have players do where they like pick their like, we would do like in a game, I think like 3 is pretty much the limit, 3 to 5 mistakes. You'd be like, pick your top 3 mistakes, the ones that are most important. Like everybody review your own copy of the pull from start to finish and pick out like the thing that you did, and like just take a moment to like visualize it. Like that's what we do in League now.
We do that as well. And we've also started incorporating multiple POVs from our players and showing it in between the pulls, being like, it's a much different effect to say, guys, with this debuff, don't do this, than it is to show a point of view from one of the players that just had it and show you exactly what it looks like to do it wrong or right.
And do you show that to the whole team? Do you do the whole team around a TV, or do you do it all on like a Discord screen share?
Discord screen share, because we haven't had to have everyone at the same event, but we do have a classroom in the complexity place where we compete at that I have a laptop in there that is Discord screen sharing and also porting what I'm doing onto the big interactable board in front of me. So I'm showing it to the people there and also sharing it to everybody back at home. Yeah. But yeah, that's been a major level up in our success in between polls. Has been it's just so much better for WoW raiders, the way they learn, most people, the way they learn, just to see it exactly visually, and them obviously in their head putting their character in that position and how they would deal with it has like massively increased consistency.
And for the amateur players, I would say probably every single person on your roster is doing this automatically, because they're all autodidacts, which is like automatic learners. Like you said, most of them are also like systemic learners, where they'll like learn automatically and they'll be really talented and they get to a point with that, but then they also have to like actually reflect and analyze.
Yeah, people are very different. There's a lot of people that would rather just see it themselves 10 times, you know? Like there's people that they just need reps, and some fights are like that. It's just very different.
So for the amateur players, probably you guys are not like doing the thing that they're doing when they're watching a VOD, which is like that's pointless. You can watch as much video as you want. If you don't actually like visualize yourself doing it and like moving the keys, you're not going to get any tertiary effect out of watching the VOD, unless it's as a bookmark where you're like, okay, the next time this happens live, I'll like remember that, and then I'll pay more attention in the moment, and so then you can get that effect. But you can also get the small learning effect actually like when you're watching the VOD, which is why VOD review is so crucial for both of those things.
Yeah, we've found that VOD review is more often than not the best use of those 3 to 10 minutes in between polls, is just to give someone a extreme visual clarity of what we just wiped to and why, and move on and go again. Also something, well, I kind of wanted to talk about a few other things, but like when I think a lot of groups go through this question, and the answer is when to take breaks if they're improvisational breaks. So let's say you have set breaks throughout the day, but then your guild's just really not feeling it. 3 bad pulls in a row, the vibe's kind of down. You know what, guys, let's just step away from our computer for a second and come back. Is there anything more nuanced to that than sometimes people just need breaks, but also, every time if you're not feeling it, if you take a break, then you're just taking a break all day. So like, what exactly do you think would be the, is there any like stuff you've looked into about that?
Yeah, you have a purpose for that break, which is to like increase concentration. So I'll equate this to team building. There are like, if you think about it, this is like kind of like a one-to-one comparison. But let's say that there's a team, right, and he has a coach, and he's like, we need to be a better team. There's like people don't get along, and they don't really know each other, and they don't trust each other. So we're going to do some team building. So he like takes them out to dinner, he takes them out to the movies. He does all these like team building things. Takes them to paintball, and like nothing changes. Like the relationships kind of like stay the same, and people still don't trust each other, even though he did these things. It's because like there's actually things that happen when you go to dinner that is the actual team building. And there's things that actually happen like when you do paintballing that is the actual like building the relationship with the other person. So there's been a little bit of scientific research on like what is the thing that builds like trust and rapport or like rapport between players. And just on a side note, like a lot of it comes down to information sharing. So there's this activity we do where like I put two people together. I kind of like replace an entire season of going out to dinner with a team with this 4-hour activity where we like everybody pairs up and they go through this worksheet where they answer 3 sets of like increasingly in depth and like vulnerable and like deep questions about each other, like peeling back layers of an onion. And then at the end, they have to like stare into each other's eyes for like a minute. And then when I do this with teams, it's like a hard day. It is really intense. But then like the level of like, I guess you would say like team connection and rapport there is like instantly what you'd get from like 50 team dinners. Because we just do the stuff that's supposed to be happening at the team dinner that actually builds team rapport besides this like the team dinner thing. That's important too, but like for a different reason. So I would guess that like when you take a break, you have a goal for the break, and it's to like there are people that are messing up or there's a vibe in the team that needs to be fixed, and we're hoping that during the break something will happen magically that will like cause that to fix.
Exactly, magically. There's no we've already talked about how to solve the mechanic. Someone or a few people or as a group we just can't seem to do it right. We don't think there's a better strat option, and it's just like what you said magically. It's like, okay, let's just take 10 minutes to relax. Maybe people will come back and play better.
This is when you would bug complexity to like have their sports psych on site with you. But basically, you need to identify. There's probably like 2 or 3 things it could be, and you have to identify going into the break like what it is, like whether it's like people are tired or not concentrating, people aren't resetting, somebody's upset about something, and somebody's not saying something to somebody else. It could be a lot of things, or it could be really basic, just like level of alertness across the squad. And then you would do a couple things. One thing you could do is you could just get people outside in the sunlight. If you didn't have like 15 to 20 minutes of like really high lumen, high lux like light going into the eyes in the morning, like you can have a really like low level of melatonin suppressant. It can be like not strong enough, so like your reflexes could just be slower. So you could just like everybody needs to get outside. We're going to take a 15-minute walk, right? It could be like everybody had fried food the night before. And so when you have fried food, your reflexes are slower the next day, especially if everybody drank pop with it too. So it could be like a matter of like, okay, we need a caffeine break. Everybody needs to have a little bit of caffeine to try to like replace the fried food. Maybe we take some fish oil supplements. I don't know, because you didn't take them last night. It's probably too late at that point.
Yeah.
Or it could be like people are fragmented. Here's an example of this. There's this fantastic study that came out of Sweden on injuries. So injuries in this is European football, female Division 1, so like the top division in Europe, and national, not international. And it was in the preseason, so they were analyzing how many people had injuries, acute and like overuse injuries throughout the entire like preseason, which is like 18 or 20 games. And the average number of injuries was like 12 to 15 per team. And these are in Esport, these are mistakes. We don't get injured. We just like, instead of like twisting your ankle, you like fall off the ice bridge, on the Sylvanas chain or whatever. Or you like press F instead of Shift F and you end up like wild charging backwards off of whatever. So what they did was they did a mindfulness intervention where every single team in the locker room before they went out for the pull or like the training basically, they did this like seated meditation where they're like, okay, think of all of the things that are like fragmenting your brain's attention. You have the economics, like you have this credit card bill. Your kid is like in this daycare and you're really worried about like leaving them, and are they going to develop attachment problems, that their mom is like gone for these hours of the day, and all this stuff that just has nothing to do with what we're doing here, which is always present in the brain, right? It's just always this like morning monologue. And some people have days where there's just like worse. And they brought it all focused down to like, okay, let's like breathe through it, and we're just going to like continuously train the brain to refocus away from that onto the task of soccer over and over and again. And they did that for 15 minutes. And they had intervention teams and non-intervention teams. And the average number of injuries for the non-intervention teams was 15, 12 to 15, same as like the previous seasons. And the average number of injuries in these teams that did this intervention every single training was 2 for the whole preseason. And,
with enough sample size, I assume. Yeah, that's
with a huge sample size. Yeah, they did this over multiple seasons, multiple years in different teams.
That's insane.
And so if you equate that to esport, basically you're saying like you have these unforced errors that are occurring because of inattentiveness. If you have the whole pie of focus, your brain can be focused on 100%. And for every fragment of like raid leading, for example, where you're 80%, 20% raid leading and 80% DPSing, well, everybody else has their like 20% they're worried about their credit card bill or what Jimmy said or like the what the streamer said this morning or last night. The fact that they died 50 times. And you have to like, you can do it. It can be meditation, or it can be a talk, or it can be like a focus activity, or something that just makes everybody like set aside. What a lot of sports teams do is they have the captain come in and they put the hand in the middle, and they get everybody focused.
Yeah.
And like, it can take the form of a lot of different things, but the most scientific and pure form would be like a seated attention activity where you tell people with cues that when their attention goes somewhere else, that they revert it and try to wholly focus on a single thing, which usually is touch or sight or sound or some sort of sensation. So like you can have a staring cue or you can have a sight or sound cue, and it's just like calming. You do this over 10 minutes and it like kind of like shakes off the brain's like fractured focus and like hones it in on one point, and then you can bring that muscle, because it's kind of like warming up a muscle. It's like if you haven't used a muscle in a while, and then you're like, okay, let's warm up our focus muscle, and you get it to just focus on something for 100% for like 10 minutes, and then you go to the pull, and you're back, and you can use the same muscle to like focus on just the pull and not your credit card bill or whatever.
Yeah. No, that absolutely makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's very cool, and I'm also imagining a world where a couple of my raiders are sitting in a room and staring at each other, and that's just like a hilarious sight to me, and like how that would work out. I'm pretty sure that'd be so good.
The team building thing is really fun because at the beginning people hate it and they're like, this is so uncomfortable, and at the end they're like, they have these connections with these people. Well, you can raid with somebody for like 3 years. This is how I do this. I'm like, okay, how many of you have been on a team together before? And they'll be like, I've been on a team with this guy for 2.5 years. I have been with him every single day for like 6 months, 12 hours a day for 2 years. And I was like, okay, what's his favorite color? And the guy's like,
no clue.
Crap. And it's like, how many sisters and siblings does he have? And it's like, don't know. When's his birthday? No idea. Where's his hometown? Oh, I know that. Okay. All right. Like, where did he go to high school? Like, oh, okay. Like, they know not the slightest thing about anybody that they're with. And so by the end of this, it's like they actually know the people that they're with, and it makes such a difference in the rapport. Like when you're out there and you have to like let somebody, you don't want to let your teammate down. Like you don't want to lose face by admitting your mistake, or you don't want to let your teammate down. One of those has to be stronger, right? It's either you don't want to let your teammate down and you want to admit what you did, even if it's benching yourself because you're bad, because you love them so much that you don't want them to not get world first because you're like bad at the game, right? So you're either like hiding your mistakes and you're like, no, I want to stay on the team even though like I'm messing up and like I'm bad, I must hide it and like protect myself. Or you're like, your ego is like totally into your teammates, where you're just like, these guys, I respect them and I love them so much that I would rather bench myself than see them fail. And that's the kind of rapport you're going for, and that is built through like this kind of like deep information sharing, where you're like, what are your secret dreams and desires and goals and ambitions, and what is your life been like?
No, that's like really interesting, actually. I think we have obviously have never done that exercise, but I think we've accomplished a lot of that. I think a lot of people in our guild, exhibit that kind of behavior where they care way more about the people they raid with to get something done.
Well, the proof's in the pudding. Like, you guys are probably doing a lot of this stuff
on accident.
Why you're on the first or second place, podium. It's the part of my motivation for doing these kinds of like talks is because there are guilds that are striving to like move the needle towards like what you're accomplishing, and if you were able to explain it to them, you might be able to, like your educational content is along that realm. And I thought like maybe we can unpack some of the actual techniques that would like allow other guilds to like pull some of those strings.
Oh yeah. One thing, kind of not too much of a tangent. The first time we stayed at the complexity place, the second time we stayed at the first time we stayed at the complexity place, we had a 7-minute hotel walk to the venue. Okay. The second time we were right across the street.
Oh no. So
quite literally a 30-second walk to the venue. And the third time, most recently, we had another 7.5 minute walk to the venue. I noticed better morning attempts on both of the raids in which we had a longer walk to get to the facility.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any correlation with that?
Huge. That's what I was going to talk about with like the sleep and light thing, because the way that alertness works throughout the day, especially for gamers, is pretty obvious. There's actually a ton of research on like light and melatonin suppression. And so you're producing melatonin, right? And when you have peak melatonin in your plasma, you're at your lowest body temperature and your lowest level of alertness, and it's like the middle of the night, usually like 3 to 4 a.m. And then when you have peak melatonin suppression, so you have the lowest amount of melatonin in your body, and you have the highest body temperature and the highest level of alertness, it's usually like in the mid-afternoon. Usually when we equate to the doldrums, like most people are like kind of tired after lunch, like 2 to 4, but actually technically that should be like 2 to 5 should be like our most alert time. So they took these, they did this fantastic study where they brought these people out to just like Mother Nature. They took away their phones, they took away everything, and they just had them live out there raw for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they measured their serum melatonin. And what they found out is that we in the industrial world, or like in the developed world, are living in this like, if you imagine a sine wave or a cosine wave of like peaks and valleys, right, going along, you have like high melatonin, low melatonin, and we're just living in this like very narrow band of like kind of like low melatonin activation and low melatonin suppression. So in other words, like really crappy sleep and really crappy alertness. And the people who are just like out there and getting like full on blasted with sunlight first thing in the morning, and then like really rapid like environmental temperature drops at night to like drop you into this like deep sleep, their waves of the circadian rhythm were massive. They were huge compared to like the people who are just living inside. And so that matters a little bit for like worker productivity, and it's interesting for the workplace. But for performers, and especially for esport players, this is like a really big thing, because we have like these massive days of like 10, 12, 14 hours of training. For basketball players, they can play like 3.5 hours a day before they're like physically limited. They cannot train anymore, or they will just get injured, right? It's a high injury sport, and there's impact on the knees and the joints, and you literally just get to the stopping point where like you can't train anymore, and you are moving your muscles, and so you're having a lot of adrenaline there. But like esports is so low injury that we are able to practice it for so long that attention and alertness becomes like the limiting factor in our performance. And so this matters like so much more for us than it ever will in traditional sport. So yeah, I think that like lights cannot get as bright as the morning sun. And they have determined that it is literally the lux. So they've mimicked this. They like have, if you take like streamer lights, for example, which you probably have, and you turn them up to the maximum brightness, like 75%, you shine them in your eyes, you're going to get the same effect as if you took that morning walk. So you could like just literally like shine fluorescent overhead office lighting, not even close to as strong enough. But if you walk them for 7 minutes, it's 7 to 15 minutes, by the way, but 7 minutes is the minimum amount for activation. Or actually, they tested 5 minutes, it was no. They tested 10 minutes, it was yes. Tested 15 minutes, it was yes. So
7 minutes is the guess.
So yeah, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Okay, so that
more than
yeah.
5.
So we're mandatory walk gang, because what they did during the last raid is they had shuttles available to shuttle people to the hotel from the thing, and I'm banning shuttles now. We're hard walking. A 7-minute walk is nothing, and also the difference. I think that was the biggest difference. So going from every raider being in their own house, waking up and going to their computer, most of them, versus having almost all of them at an event, everyone eating at the same time, making sure they actually have full meals, except for THD, and making sure they have like, you know, like they're like sleeping at the right time, they're going to the hotel, they're not staying up on their computer, like that. And the walking in the morning, the biggest difference I saw was our morning pulls used to be horrific, because most of our raiders were quite literally getting out of bed and going to their computer. Right. And the difference between them walking there, eating and playing is like, I mean, night and day doesn't even do it enough justice. It's totally different.
Yeah. It's like a different person. Like literally a different person. Yeah, that's probably the most important intervention, I would say, in alertness that would make an impact. Probably that. I think in the same way, there's reaction speed probably isn't as important in World of Warcraft as it is in like League of Legends or CSGO. So I would imagine that the tiredness from like sleep debt that lowers reaction speed is probably not as relevant as the impact it has on learning, like rewiring motor neurons.
Yes.
And there is like really fascinating research on the rehearsal that you get for like motor learning during sleep. So if you think of like how it is that the brain rewires neurons, essentially you have the neuron body, and you have like the axon that goes out, and then you have the connections to the other neurons, and you have a pulse that needs to be activated over this like hillock at the base of the neuron. And you need to have enough interventions onto the neuron's body that it like overcomes that hillock and like sends the signal onward. So the more connections that you grow onto that, like the lower threshold you need to like activate that neuron and fire it. And those connections are grown through like constantly firing that loop over and over and over and over again. And a lot of times for esport and for traditional sport, for like motor movements, this is really hard to like build a new reaction that is like different to a similar reaction, but like better, because you will by default like be firing that chain of neurons that goes to the slightly inferior motor reflex compared to the new one that you're learning, especially under pressure. And so attention matters a lot, but so does repetition. And most of our repetitions seem to come when we're asleep. So the way that the best way I have of describing this is that they're doing this research on rats, obviously, because you can't cut open the brain of a human, and we don't have the ability to see on the neuronal level right now, like with a closed brain. You have to cut open the brain, you have to shine light through the flesh with like a sensor on the other side, and you can like see kind of like individual neurons. But like if we're on the outside, like we're just looking in with magnets, or like listening to electromagnetic signals, so we don't have like a very nuanced view of this. But in a rat, so they were having them, they put some sensors in there and they shine some light through, and then they had sound to represent like different channels, and they had them like learn a maze, let's say, or whatever it is, the motor thing that they had them learn, and then they had them go to sleep. And so if the sound of what was happening, like let's say during the day, was like doot 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 doot, like that's the whatever the chain of the thing that they were learning. The way that this researcher described this was that at night it was like doot 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 doot. It was just shooting it through, like rehearsing it in its dreams, like over and over and over again, like thousands of more times than during the day, during the 50 repetitions it got during the day. It was getting thousands and thousands of firing along this chain. So there is heavy debate among neuroscientists on whether or not this is relevant, whether these rehearsals matter. We know that like they happen. We know that motor learning happens when there is disrupted sleep, and this does not happen. We know that motor learning happens when this does happen. And so like this is an area where the science has no consensus, but you have information, and probably the information is pointing at sleep being like really crucial for motor learning, for rehearsal of like complex
do you know how long that sleep needs to be start to finish for that to take effect at all?
So the interesting thing is like the less sleep you have, the faster you get into the high quality sleep. So like this is something that they have noticed in sleep research is like, for long-term health, sleep is crucially important to get like 8 hours. We're talking like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all of these complications. Like you need to be sleeping like 8 hours to have a end of life brain health. Okay, so you should definitely fix that if you're not, and soon. And I can explain the mechanisms behind that too. It's really fascinating and terrifying, by the way. But if you just sleep 4 hours, your brain is just going to go boom straight into that and just like immediately start churning through. So you're going to get like probably instantly like deep sleep and very little of the like the REM sleep, and then you're going to wake up, and I think volume here is more important than timing for like the race for world first setting. So if we're talking about MDI season over the course of like 8 weeks, you want to have this like incredibly good and regimented regularity, and you want to have like 8 hours minimum as a competitor. My league players get exhausted after training, and they sleep like 10 hours, because this is such taxing mental work.
So my sleep during the race world first, I think we raid usually from like 9 to midnight about. So we end our raid and then we start our next raid at 9 hours. Generally speaking, I would probably give our raiders an average of going to bed about 1 hour after they're done.
So you're thinking they get like 6 hours of sleep? 6 to 8.
6 to 8, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I can tell you from the like if when these races are getting along the 1 week mark or longer, you just start to be so mentally exhausted from your brain just working overtime for that much time. Where I've had raids where I've gotten an actual 8 hours of sleep, woke up early and showed up to raid. However, I'm still just the end of the raid. You're so exhausted. There'll be multiple days where I sleep for 10 to 12 hours and wake up still exhausted until I have days to like recover from it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
burnout is a whole different shebang, because some of the neurotransmitters that you're using to like do this stuff take more than 24 hours to remake. Like when you're making a neurotransmitter, right? You construct it. Imagine that, like, I need a diagram. This is what I'm normally drawing on the whiteboard, but you have like the neuron body, and then you have the long thin thing, and then out here you have the like little dendrites that like attach the other neurons, right? The manufacturing of the neurotransmitters happens here, and then there's this like protein walking mechanism that walks it all the way out to the end and puts it out there. And like this is like physical things, right? You actually have to make these neurotransmitters, and you have to transport them to the ends of your neurons, and you have to like restock them as you use them. And some of this stuff takes 6 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours. We just don't. There's so much we don't know about like burnout and the physical components that are involved in it. But the reality is that like it's unavoidable in your particular sport, because you're trying to like get to the very, very, very edge of burnout, like one step before it, consistently at the point where like you win first, right?
Yep.
And like the other team loses, but you don't break. And I think it's similar to the marathon in that like you're trying to reach the highest body temperature. Like normally you'd think like body temperature is like you don't want to get heat stroke, right? And so people are like, oh, well, when you're running, like the higher your body temperature gets, the worse it is. But body temperature is a predictor of marathon success. So the people who win the marathon have the highest internal body temperature. And it's because they're pushing themselves to the edge of heat stroke, you know, with like how much can their engine like sustain before their brain shuts it down, and it's just like, you will now collapse on the ground, and that is that, because I don't want to die, you know. And so like I feel like there's the like the health perspective, like well balanced lifestyle, kind of like you would say like sports psychology for the everyman. But then there's the like, if you're working with a high performance team, like I would say you're probably doing it right for sleep if we're talking about a 1 to 2 week competition here, because you're balancing the huge benefit you get from being awake with the unknown quantity of benefit you get from being asleep. Plus, we know that the sleep debt generally adds like milliseconds of like reaction speed delay over time throughout the day. So like, let's say by the end of the 7 days, you're like, so let's say 6 hours of sleep debt, because everybody's been sleeping 6 hours instead of 8. You guys are going to have slower reaction speed starting about 2 hours into your day. It's going to start to decline rapidly, as opposed to like being able to sustain it for the whole day. But like reaction speed matters less than like learning capability, and you can still get some good focus and out of repetitions, even if you're tired.
This makes so much more sense as to why the best pulls of our day, since we've been going to an event together, are universally the first 2 to 3 hours of a raid before lunch break. It's always there, and it almost rarely ever goes up from there. You may see more progression later because you're putting in more time, but you won't see more efficient pull-to-pull stuff there. And the other reason I've considered getting more sleep, because I know for a fact people aren't getting 8 when our raid starts 9 hours after we stop.
Right.
But getting more sleep, I'm not certain that people would actually sleep, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not certain if we ended our raid at 10 instead of 12 that people would have the mental fortitude over 20 people to go to sleep.
Right.
Even if they could.
5-man team, it's hard. I would tell you, it's almost impossible to micro that with a 5-man team. With a 20-man team, it's like, good luck.
Yeah, and also some people are different, right? Like I'm very, very ADHD, very bad. My one of the common symptoms of that is sleep, which I have very bad. I can never sleep until I'm totally exhausted. Impossible. I have to be in my bed, cannot keep my eyes open anymore to sleep ever. I can never just decide, oh, I'm going to sleep early today. I can't do that. So I don't know how many other people. I actually think there's a higher correlation of people who have ADHD and gaming too. where I've noticed at least a lot of people that I've rated with that are like that, and it's possible that they have similar.
I do know a clinical like esport psychologist who could talk probably about a lot of that stuff that might be interesting to like have a conversation with. I'll connect you guys because
that would be fantastic.
The incidents of like ADHD and like also like how to handle ADHD maybe like during like high performance moments. If you have a lot of people like that on the team, I bet like would change how you do things.
Yeah, that's very cool. Please do that.
I'm saying that because I want to make sure I skirt along the edge of like legality because I don't want to make any claims about what I do in sport psychology. It's a protected term in North America, and my license does not cover clinical work. So, just so everybody who listens know, we're not talking about sports psychology and ADHD here as therapists or clinicians. Just so you know.
Yep. All right. Do you have? So, what else did you want to talk about? Or I know you mentioned at the end you wanted to do a Q&A as well.
We could do a Q&A. Let's see. I have here like resetting from pulls, benching, conflict management, raid lead decisions about when to call it, when to break, how to break.
That's that one. The when to call it as the raid leader. So we've had two distinct times where we've done this. So number one in Uldir before you started paying attention to it back at the beginning of BFA.
I've gone back and watched some of this now because it's fascinating.
Cool.
Sports psychology applies to my favorite game.
So we ran into the situation where we stayed up all night trying to kill it. We stayed up till 5 a.m. We had a 21-hour raid, I'm pretty sure. Obviously, this was the first time we had ever gone for it, so we made a lot of like new decisions, I guess. But one thing we learned was there was this point in the night when you raid that long where it was obvious hours before we stopped that we were not going to kill it that night. Like we had lost basically the lowest skill level required to kill it at all. And people were slowly drifting. So we decided to call it. And we learned in that raid that we called it too late and we should have identified it earlier. The same thing happened this raid where we had, some pretty soul crushing wipes where we could have killed it. And deciding whether you need to keep going or when to stop, knowing that the most likely scenario if you stop is that you lose. But the thing is, a lot of people look at that like, oh, well, why didn't you keep pulling if you knew you were going to lose? The reality is
they mess up too.
Yeah, the answer is exactly. What if they mess up too? You don't know how fast it's going to take them to kill it during the day. And then also, at that point, we were all pretty. We had like 8 or 9 pulls all in P3. We had the one with the boss 1% lower going in, and then obviously our healer DC'd with everyone alive on the third platform with all of our reses. And then that when that happened, it was like the balloon just got deflated in the raid team, and then just over the next 45 minutes, it became apparent to all of the officers. We were just like, yeah, I mean, we're not killing it tonight. Whether we can stay up and go for it if we want. It's just we're clearly not going to kill it. We lost it after that.
Soul crushing.
And
that's
then
like one of those things where it could go either way, right? Like it could be incredibly motivating, and people like focus up because of that, and like performance hones in, or it can go the other way where like people are like dismayed and like they spiral into like the blackness of despair after something goes wrong like that.
I will say
I've seen it happen both ways on sports teams.
Some of our funniest moments we've ever had as a guild were when we were up for the 20th hour trying to kill a boss. I mean, it's just, just everyone's in that delirious, everything is funny state, and, people say funny stuff. I've also, just another, I know we pretty much covered all the stuff that you wanted to cover, but there's like a couple things that I find are really interesting. So I've paid a lot of attention as like the main person communicating in our group and the raid leader as to like what you say and what you don't say over a long period of time. Right. So I think a really common thing you hear from WoW raid leaders, especially inexperienced ones, is they're just constantly saying things like, focus up, don't die here, do big damage here, stuff like that. I've taken a lot of my approach to what I say in a raid as what people have done with their UIs in WoW, which is cut out a lot of the convoluted information and only show the things that are very important to you.
You had a video about this, I think. Or
I do have a video about this.
I watched it.
Yeah. So basically the idea is, what you want people to be thinking critically about what you say always. And if you flood what you're saying with things that absolutely and never could matter, like do big damage here or, focus up, which obviously every time everyone said, no one has ever sat up in their chair and focused when you monotonously say focus up in a dull tone for the 50th time in a night. Like that doesn't matter. And for some people, I don't think they're doing it out of I don't think they're doing it because they think they're helping. They're doing it to maybe stay in a rhythm of continuing
it, or maybe for their own personal identity also. Like they want to feel valuable or feel important, or they feel like, you see this a lot with captains and coaches, that like the kind of like rote actions that you fall into in that role that define what it is to you are like important for your own like edification. So I think that like you're coming at it from a very reflective practitioner viewpoint. You're like, if I think of it as a system, why do I do everything that I do? And I think that like a lot of these are habits based upon like the coach blows the whistle because he has a whistle and it's time to blow it, rather than like, what is the purpose of this whistle and when should I blow it? But from the neuroscience perspective or the psychology perspective for attention, I guess you'd say like your base assumption is accurate. The less that you talk, the more importance your words have. So filler communication is bad for your like calling leadership. And this is straight from the military. I mean, you don't see special ops teams being like, okay, guys, we're going to go in, focus up now. All right, we're breaking down the door. Okay, careful going in here, focus up. Like you're walking in through a door where there's terrorists. Everybody's focused,
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
There's that trust there that everybody.
And if you, and it matters if you're known as saying it too. So like, if you never say, "Don't die here," or if you do, it's like ironic, like you're kidding, or if you say, do big damage here or something along those lines. If you say it a lot, it doesn't matter. But if you never say that, when you do say it, it becomes something people listen to and they actually like, because there are times when as a raid leader, you as a raid team are reaching a part of the boss where you've already met the damage check. The only thing you have to do is do this last mechanic, meaning that people don't have to choose between optimizing damage and doing the mechanic. They could literally take their hands off their keyboard, do 0 damage, and just run around and no die. Then the don't die call is very actionable because it signals to everyone exactly what the situation is. But if you say that on a pull-to-pull basis, when you do make that call, it means nothing to them. Right.
Yeah.
So,
and this is one of the frustrations I have as an average, just like an amateur player, like hearing your guys' comms and then seeing you raid lead and then understanding the science and the perspective of everything you do. And then having to sit through, let's say, my raid leader who's like doing what you're saying. I'm just like, it would be so nice. I think we could all have this like military level precision or application towards it where I think that, so you explain to your team everything I say has meaning or else I wouldn't say it. And anything that I say that doesn't have meaning, you should confront me about it because I need to know. Like, you learn best when you have a mirror and a model. So you have a mental model of like what it is that you want to communicate. And then you have a mirror, which is like you're listening to yourself, but sometimes you're going to miss some stuff. And like your raid members can like explain to them how they heard you and whether or not it's like something that they're just used to or not used to. Because you just say it too much, like it's a tick or a habit or something. And then I think that there's this programmatic thing where you're trying to program into the team the choreography of what one set phrase means. So like this is the shot call thing where like in a Navy SEAL team you might say Delta Tango whatever, and it means like a whole set of things. Like for you, it's not always gonna do big damn like means a lot of things, right? It means like if you were holding a cooldown for next phase, like maybe don't
use it now,
or like
exactly,
or it means like risk taking damage because like it's better for a healer to cast a heal spell and for you to finish the shot than to interrupt your spell, to like move or something like that. It could mean like a lot of different things, and you're kind of like programming that into the raid, like the full meanings of like your execution call, and so there's that meaning defining element of shot calling that you can like, you probably have a lot of that like beforehand before the raid, and you could probably put even more of it there. And then a lot of that happens in the formation of the raid, where like you say something and then it doesn't happen right, and you go back in the post-op and you're like, when I say this is what I want to happen. Like you do this and you do this and you don't do this, and this was the mistake.
I think the thing that what you're referring to, besides damage cooldowns, that most often occurs in a WoW scenario is a healer death or something going wrong with healing cooldowns early, to where you actually leverage a resource you have available to you personally, being a health pot or a hellstone, and using that 2 minutes before a part of the fight that we pretty much have them hard assigned to even live through it at all, to basically act as a healer cooldown.
Right.
But we had to use them early this pull to see more consistent progression and see something later, knowing that you're almost inevitably going to wipe to this thing without it. But that's a much better example, I think, of it, of leveraging resources early to see something later. Exactly. Yeah. Where damage cooldowns, it's pretty rare that you would use them to get past. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I can't think of any examples. Maybe monks who hold their cooldown for a Sylvanas platform.
Monks are a good example just because of the charge system and such a low cooldown.
Or
but
like,
yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe Ashen Hollow, where you're like, we're never going to get to that phase where we were going to use it. So
another good example would be this. Like you use Sylvanas as an example. And Sylvanas P2, the only actionable thing that helps you get to see P3 at all is to have all of your damage and healing cooldowns on the ad platforms that are the only thing preventing you from getting there. Whereas when you're actually in a kill scenario, you're moving a lot of those cooldowns to both of the boss burns to get way more ahead on the damage check you need to do. But until you're at the enrage, or until you're at the point where you know how much damage you need to do and you need to optimize it and you know the finish line, it's always more optimal to over assign cooldowns to get to see a point, just to have it be more familiar to all your players.
Right. I can't badmouth my equipment though. That's a no-no when you have certain. It's like once you take a mouse sponsorship, you can't like curse out your mouse anymore. You know what I mean? You're like, frick, my mouse made me jump off, but you can't blame your mouse anymore because then the sponsors will message you and be like, hey.
I had my worst moment in all of sponsors came at the very beginning. The first time I was ever sponsored by a brand, and it was through Complexity. It was like our first like month with Complexity or something like that. I got back from our first race to World First, and my mic wasn't working because of my mixer. So I had to use, and I have a Shure SM7B. At the time, I think I just had like a Blue Yeti, but it was like a nicer mic than most headset mics would be, right?
Sure.
So I was talking about the generalization of all headset mics, but the one that was showing in my hand was the one from our sponsor, and I was like, the mics on these are bad, but I wasn't saying like, X brand microphones were bad. It was just showing in the thing. I'm like, man, headset mics are just terrible. And then the sponsor saw a clip of that and sent it to Complexity, and I was in big trouble. So yeah, that was my first. I definitely got a big lesson there.
Yep. So I'm just going to say that was my Discord. Not going to blame the equipment.
All good. All right. So people in both of our chats, if you guys have any questions, I guess, about what we've or if you want to paint it in a more specific way, but just any questions along the lines of what we talked about.
Yeah, what we were talking about was a lot of like stuff that applies to the very, very top end of performance. Like we're talking about like going from the 1%, right? From like 99% performance to 1%, like 100%. But most of my career has been built around a passion of like getting into like the little leagues of esport, like where schools are building leagues and where localities are building leagues, and finding ways of making that particular esport productive for society, which happens usually through the leadership, through the coaching, or the parents that are involved in running it, to make sure that like it actually develops social and emotional skills. They actually do it right with like the breaks like that you guys would take, and stuff like that. And when I see your guild professionalizing and showing the world like how it's done, maybe doing content around like how you guys break and how you guys eat and how that is maximized per performance, like leads to other people in WoW who are like pursuing Mythic Plus rating or pursuing rating, like start to take their kind of like health and the social and emotional aspect of the game like seriously in a way that like is beneficial, so that the time that we spend sitting down and destroying our bodies isn't just all a loss. I think that like for me, I'm curious to know what questions there are from the amateur perspective of like what are the problems that you guys are facing. I think that some of them are very different. Like in League of Legends, we'll have a talk like this, and then the audience will be like, yeah, but I get really nervous when I go into a ranked game. So like, how do I get over my anxiety when I'm joining a new M+ team, public M+ team when I queue up, like how do I handle the pressure of performance in that moment, or how do I deal with a troll who's like bad mouthing me? Like these are questions that I deal with a lot in the amateur side, and so I think I'm curious like about those questions as well as like any finesse or what am I trying? What's the word I'm trying to say? Any kind of like minute thing that we kind of like missed that you're like, yeah, but you didn't address it like in this way, so I don't understand. And I don't really know how you usually do Q&A on a stream as large as yours, if you prefer to have it in a Discord chat or what. But
I mean, usually what I do is I just kind of, there's obviously whenever your stream gets bigger, there is a lot more filler in chat, but there is also going to be like really good questions you can pick out that do that. So if you want to have
use like at limit maximum or at mind games Weldon, and then we'll see it highlighted in the chat.
Yeah, for a good thing. That's probably a good idea. So one is a member of Echoes in my chat. He asked, are there opposite kind of people where the research simply does not apply, or to a much smaller degree?
For sleep?
I think he's kind of talking about just like a lot of this performance optimization coaching, kind of like, your spot in a team, your maybe for sleeping. But
So the research is universal to humans, but the practical applications of the protocols that we build off that research are different person to person, which is why there are sports psychology trainers and why are there sports psychology researchers. Because we have like data from the research, right? And we kind of like start to paint a picture of the theory of how this works in the brain. And then you build protocols off of that for humans. But like the complexity of performance means that those protocols will usually they're adapted to the reality of the situation and the person and like how they're wired. But yeah, most of the stuff that is like a finding is pretty accurate to humans. Like I'll give an example. There's a theory of expertise based around like short-term memory, and essentially they say that there's like you have like 6 to 8 slots in your short-term memory. In your working memory, they call it your WM. And within those, you can hold like patterns, or you can hold facets of information. And the working theory of expertise is that you construct a pattern out of something that would take up 3 slots in your working memory, and you construct a pattern to merge that into 1 slot. And that's what you're doing when you're pulling repetitively. Like
I read a lot about this. I read a talk from someone who did memory, who was like a memory champion, like where they memorize long sets of numbers or pictures or things like that. And they talked about this, what they do to manipulate that.
The author of that book, Anders Ericsson, who is also the person whose lab coached those memory people as part of that experiment, kind of formulated that theory. And that theory is wildly controversial, by the way, but it's also it shows like it's a good example of like how it is that expertise is built. And so we say we tell people like, yeah, you probably have 6 to 8 slots, and like the exceptional have like 12, and the exceptional on the other end have like 4. And most people who are pros are like, haha, I must be 12, because like I'm an elite athlete. And we're like,
I'm elite, yeah.
That's not how it works. Like you are an average human. Like I guarantee that almost every single person who's like a professional esport player and most people who are like professional sports athletes are like pretty average human.
Yeah.
Except for like a few exceptional things.
Yep.
So yes, I would say to the Echo guy, I bet he's average human in terms of like the findings in research, but protocols would be wildly different for him depending on what works for him,
Yeah. Okay, and then another good one I think was, this is actually something where I know how to handle it from my end and how I've handled it, but I want to know more from your side. Let me see if I can find the exact thing. I read it earlier. How do you work with a player who is exceptionally good mechanically but has problems? Well, he used the words being toxic, but I guess we could say has trouble fitting into a team environment or is pretty adversarial.
Yeah, I mean, usually the advice is to cut them before they destroy your team, because there's a plethora of talent out there, and there's a lack of what the people need is the ability to use that talent productively for the team in a team game. So that's basically what we've done. Is that honestly, I feel like this is such a weird question, because at this level, I promise you, those people never rise to this level. Like it's just so rare for someone to be good enough and also have those traits. Like to act like that, you have to go into a situation where you believe in your mind that you are just better than everyone else here in a way for you to exhibit a lot of that behavior.
And it would be like borderline psychotic to show up to a guild like this and think that after playing with people. You'd be crazy, right? For anyone to think like that, even our best players to think like that.
But it probably happens a lot in amateur guilds. And for those guilds, you just have to ask, do we want to lose this one player who like he thinks, and maybe we think too, that he's better than our other players? Or do we want to lose everybody else in the guild who's going to leave because of him?
Exactly. Basically, no matter how good you are, even at the highest level, even if you found someone to be even exceptional in an environment like this, it's still never worth the morale hit and the potential loss of other talent from people. Basically, anytime someone is universally disliked for pretty much any reason, it's usually not a good idea to keep them around, in my opinion.
And then the question is like, do you want to be the place that teaches them or develops them that? Like, do you want to be a developmental guild where you kind of like take these people in and you try to improve them? Or do you want to be like a filterer where you're like, we want to find the right fit people, and the people who can't handle it, just leave and like go develop yourself somewhere else, destroy other people's lives while you kind of like meander through the internet until you like mature.
See, that's the thing. Go ahead.
There's an argument to be made for people who really want to like help those people mature. And for that, I think that you need to form a bond with them where they trust you to be like honest with them, and they trust that you like them as a person, even if you don't like their behavior. So you need to talk to them long enough to figure out what it is that separates them from how they act, and then work with them to identify why they act out that way, and kind of help them separate that from who they are as a person. That's more like the therapy side. So you could also just recommend they go to BetterHelp or something.
Yep. All right, cool. Let's see. Do you see one in there that you want to talk about? Let me see.
They're all tagging
kind of
you.
skimming.
I wasn't looking.
They are, yeah.
So
if you guys want to tag him as well, you're at is it Mind Games Weldon on Twitch as well?
At Mind Games Weldon. It will highlight specifically me, but I can read the ones to you too. How do I handle being misunderstood by teammates? Confronting them might lead to getting kicked or more drama, putting the competition camaraderie in jeopardy. Yeah, direct communication is best. Like, I think that you should think of it in the long term. Generally speaking, if you're like hedging your ability to develop as a communicator based on the group that you're in, in a few years, you're not going to know any of these people, right? Probably. And so wouldn't it be better to have an experience where you're like trying to get understood and you end up messing something up and you get kicked and you learn something from it, rather than just sitting quietly and waiting for this moment in your life to pass you by? I'll give an example of the language learner. There's this person who's trying to learn Spanish, right? And there's just two people. And this one person is given a list of vocabulary words, 10 words, and they take it home and they practice it a bunch. And they just like, they're memorizing the list and they're memorizing the list and they're like working on their Spanish and they're just like going over and over and again. And then the other person, they show up to the class and they're reciting the list in front of the class of 25 kids, and they mess up and the teacher points at them and then everybody laughs like, oh my gosh, he messed up that word. Ha, ha, ha. And your face turns red and you're embarrassed and you remember that moment and you remember that word for the next like 25 years of your life. You never forget it. You learned the pronunciation and the meaning right there permanently, forever. Whereas the person who's like at home studying the list, like they forgot them, 2 years after they graduated high school. So if you find yourself in these like high adrenaline, high stress conflict situations over the internet where you are striving to like learn something, like how to communicate something better or how to be a leader, and you mess it up and you end up in this like situation that you regret and you think about and your brain dwells on, that's not necessarily a bad thing. This isn't PTSD all the time. Sometimes it's just like a learning moment that you like get fixated in there, and that will actually like help shape you as a person if you build on that and improve it more than just like sitting through a whole bunch of like different conflicts and doing nothing and waiting it out. So that's what I would recommend. Confronting them might lead to this high stress environment where like something bad happens, but that also is a good thing too.
Okay. And then I think a good one here, this is actually, I have a lot of input on this, or not too much, but on the topic of talent, is it possible for someone who is considered average at the game to train to get better? Or is the psychological side more to hone innate skill? So I think I think one thing is true. You can maybe go more in depth with this, that there are always going to be people that are just more naturally talented at something than you. Like if you put a bunch of people, the analogy I always use is if you just put a bunch of people in a warehouse, you feed them and they sleep and they play video games, a lot. They're basically the same amount for a year. Their skill level will be wildly different, right? Some people will be very, very, very good at something and some people won't. One person I could train. I've never played League. I could play League right now until, for 5 years and study every bit of it and use everything I've ever learned from another game to be good at that game. And I will quite possibly / almost certainly not be nearly as good as the best people in that game because they're just better than me. Right. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. Talent is the word we use to define a cocktail of like both environmental and genetic advantage, that like essentially somebody could do something for the same amount of time as you or less than you and like reach a higher level in terms of like some sort of metric performance, right? That exists. That's real, right? And in some cases you have talents like height in basketball where like there's like a cutoff, right? If you're not this tall, you will never play professional basketball. Or they study sports in terms of like early specialization. So some sports are late specialization. Like we know that in soccer, European football, you can start in your teenage years, and within 3 years of specialization in soccer, you can be playing at the international level in Europe if you're like a really good athlete. Whereas downhill skiing, if you are not skiing by the time you are 3 years old, your chance of being in a World Cup of skiing is 0. There's no chance. It's never happened. So there's like early specialization and late specialization, and the misperception that a lot of people have is what talent is in esport, because I bet it's different than what you actually think it is.
That's so wild. That example you gave about the skiing thing was exactly right.
That's told by a Finn, that statistic. So I never went and verified it independently, by the way, but this was a scientist in Finland, so I assume that it's accurate.
I've learned through my times in WoW, the only time I've ever encountered Finnish people in WoW has been at BlizzCon, and I've learned 2 things. Is one, they are universally incredibly intelligent. Everyone I've ever met, they're very, very smart, and they also drink a lot and do not seem to be affected by it as much as normal human beings. Those are the 2 things I. Yeah. So that is really interesting, actually. And the skill sets can be so different between games too, right? It's like look at like the skill set between something like StarCraft 2, probably extremely unique in that way, where simple actions per minute is pretty much untouched by any other game. But that's something that's so unique to that, where gaming skill is not universal because the genres in games are so different.
Yeah, I think it's genre specific. I also think that like this is what I've told a lot of people, is that a lot of it is based around how you learn. So like, are you an autodidact? That meaning that like, will your brain like see these patterns and mistakes in game theory? And will you like sense that you are unoptimized? And then do you have this perfectionistic double-edged sword attitude where like you cannot suffer that? Like you would rather strive to like fix that than anything else. And I like to say that there are basically 2 people that play video games, or there are 2 ways of playing video games. There's the like entertainment escapism variety where like you could play you treat it like a movie. You could play 1 game in the morning, you could play 1 game in the afternoon, you could play 1 game in the evening. And it's totally fine. You think that that's fun and enjoyable, and it suits you. And then there's the mastery version where like if I'm playing a video game and like my buddy asks me to play a different video game with him in the afternoon, I'm going to be like, that would be a total waste of my time because I wouldn't be playing this first video game, which is the one I'm trying to get better at. So like other video games are boring to me because the reason I play is to get better at this thing, is pursuit of mastery. So you can kind of gauge for yourself if you're more of like the entertainment-based player sometimes or the mastery-based player. Because like that's also a kind of a genetic thing, or an environmental thing or something. But anyway, if you have the wrong viewpoint towards the game, if you're not doing it in this slightly defective, unhealthy way of like perfectionism, then you probably aren't going to get to the higher level. And a lot of the learning capability that you have is generated by how you were raised from the ages of 3 to like 11 or 3 to 7, and you don't have anything to do with that anymore. So you can just kind of like be like, well, I guess it's just like GG, you know?
It's also the same thing in WoW, more specifically about playing different roles. A lot of people always ask the question like, you know, should I be playing every role? And a lot of the times what happens is people will end up trying to do too many things at once instead of mastering one of them. So they never actually become great at one thing, just good at a lot of things. And that is something where I think it's good to understand the balance of the game. Like you should know what kind of decisions healers are making if you are in a decision-making scenario. Like for me, I have to know how everything works. But like as an individual player, you kind of don't. You in a raid environment, at least, you kind of just need to know what you need to do. And it's good to have an idea of how the rest of the game works, but I think a lot of people actually hinder their learning and hinder their development as a player by trying to learn too many things at one time.
And that also is like a indication of your motivation, right? Like the proof is in the pudding there. I had this person the other day who asked me, "Hey, I'm trying like a different game now for the third game or something, and I'm trying to get really good at it, and I can't. So like I'm thinking of like how do I find a game that fits that I can be high rank?" And I was like, it sounds to me like you want to be high rank more than you want to be good at the particular game that you're doing, and that's already the problem. In that like a lot of people will switch their character or something because they've kind of reached the level that they feel like they can improve at, and they want to be like, they want that dopamine hit of like being better than somebody else at something, and they like the idea of being high IO more than they like actually.
You're saying all the right things. It's such a problem in the WoW community and definitely the Final Fantasy community for the time that I've been there, is people get so fixated on the dopamine hit of having a high parse or a high rate or IO score instead of worrying about actually being good at the game.
So if
that makes sense, they're totally different.
If you go into a key and like you kind of like outgear it, and you like expect a loot punching bag, and you kind of get annoyed at something that goes wrong, and like it becomes a challenge to finish the key right, and you're like a person who like gets mad and leaves or thinks of leaving, instead of a person who's like, oh, this is hard. Like, how can I pull this off? Like, how can I cover for this person's mistake, or how can I do this even better? Then like you already have a hint that your brain is like wired up in the wrong way for like seeing mistakes and like interpreting them as a challenge versus seeing mistakes and interpreting them as an insult to
exactly
skill.
Yep. Yeah. I had a video kind of talking about that too. And that's like, you talked a little bit earlier, this is not a question from chat, but like how different raid leaders, you said your own raid leader even acted like sometimes in a way that you didn't get. And I think that's because of a lot of the ways that people process information. Like when you're the person given the title or job or role of trying to be the person, not that solely fixes problems. Maybe that's part of the misconception, is like, it's a major team effort. You're just the person kind of guiding the ship in the right way. But a lot of people don't have those natural leadership skills or aren't natural leaders. There are more raid leader positions in World of Warcraft than there are, actual true natural leaders who have the skill set and want to be a leader. In fact, so you have a lot of people that end up being put into those roles for two reasons that aren't just it naturally suits them, because no one else will and they need one, which is where a lot of people have a lot of those bad tendencies, I think. And then there's people who, there's definitely people out there that want the power position when they're not suited for it. They want to be the person in charge, I guess.
Yeah.
So I've actually, without too much of a scientific look on it, I've just found it interesting to look at how guilds operate and how the people in their guild interact with their leader, and like kind of if it seems like they're natural. Because what you'll see in a lot of guilds is that the person calling all the shots and the person people listen to are not the same, right? There'll be a person that is kind of like they're like the guy of the guild. They're just not the guy saying things every poll, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we had this incredible like actual raid leader in our guild who like came with all of the plans and all of the CDs and like did most of the calls, and then we had like also the guild leader who like kind of felt like he should be doing that sometimes. And when things got really hard, he would like speak up, but like it was like there was the socially determined captain or leader, and then there was the like prescribed org chart determined one, which are often two different people on sports teams or on performance teams.
Very cool.
This one, are you a wizard? I think that's in reference to my hair. I'm not sure. I have been described as such by players that I have helped go pro from gold level, or by pros who I have helped win tournaments.
No, wizard.
No, I'm not, in fact, an actual wizard. I play monk right now. Not
Trying to see if there's any other good ones. Here we go. How important do you consider food and physical health compared to mental health in terms of grinding computer games for an extended period of time? Kind of talked about this earlier. Didn't really touch on the food aspect, I don't think, but the physical health was.
So there's two answers to that. There's the answer that is like the one that I would give to a person who has video games as a hobby or a pursuit in their life, and they want to have like a healthy life. And then there's the answer that I give specifically to a pro athlete in a situation on a team for like the next few weeks. And those things might vary. Like it is possible, like what I would tell, Max is like, it is possible that we will make bad decisions about his players' like long-term health for the purposes of winning a tournament. And that's like seen as okay, because generally people are like up for trading the consequences of their bodies, like that happen to their bodies for like success in some sort of performance. Like this happens in the sporting world. This is people get injured all the time. They're giving up a lot of their health to pursue elite performance. So in the name of elite performance, a lot of things are possible. But if I was going to talk about like nutrition versus mental aspect in amateur gaming, I think that they're equal. I think that you should treat nutrition and physical movement like the same as like the brain is connected to the body. It is the same thing. Like your brain is not some like you're not a glass canister walking around with like a brain in it that is like your consciousness, and that's like completely separate from this like car that you're driving around that you're like sitting in, and that is your body. The two are like one and the same, and they're fully integrated. And so your mental health is a reflection of your physical health, which is a reflection of literally what you build your cells out of, which is what you've put in your mouth. Every single cell that you built in your body is recycled through on, like a weekly to monthly to 6-week basis. And it is built freshly out of the things that you are putting in your mouth. So you are actually literally built from the things that you've consumed. And then your brain is tied into every single aspect of that. As a whole thing. So I'm a fan of the 3-way approach, and I think that you should work on all three at the same time, not one independently of the other.
So what would you do if so let's say theoretically you had a raider that would not eat any balanced meal, and instead if he ever saw anything besides a bowl with meat in it and a fork, he would eat, I'm not kidding, for major meals, he would eat Twix candy bars repeatedly. And for almost an entire week, he only ate candy and milkshakes. And he also only sleeps 4 hours a night, but is seemingly unaffected by all of this.
It might not matter for you in the short term. Like you might be having conversations with him about his like life after WoW, or like after this tier or something like that. Or
but what if he doesn't care about that? You're not helping.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say like there are things that affect immediate performance and reaction speed. Maybe you could get through him through that angle. So you can tell him that like 20 milliseconds of reaction speed difference if he like takes a fish oil pill or cuts down on his omega-12 intake through meat. So you can say like essentially you have these insulators built around your neurons, and the higher quality the insulation, the faster the signal. You need like a more of a ratio of omega-3s than you have in order to build like better insulation. And it has been shown that after 6 weeks of consuming omega-3, along with like a diet or by cutting out omega-12s, so that you have like more of a appropriate ratio to what like you should be eating for the different viscosities of fat, that you can improve your reaction speed, which is like from your head seeing something to like you moving your hand or your fingers by like 20 milliseconds. So imagine how that plays out in an esport setting. And I translated the timing to like ping basically. So he has ping in his brain. If he fixes it, he's faster. Maybe you can get through that way.
Okay, so I just need to get him to take like some fish oil pills, and I think I could probably trick him into doing that.
That's one step. Yeah, if he's eating a ton of meat, he's at risk for heart disease, and fish oil is actually now recognized by the CDC or the FDA. Sorry, the FDA, not the CDC. The FDA as protective against high cholesterol driven heart disease.
All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna I'm gonna do that thing that you do to dogs, where you like give them like those little pill pocket things, where you like give them a nice
You need
little
to hook them up
tasty
with
treat.
Gingy.
You shove
Oh yeah, you shove the pill in the actual meat.
Oh yeah, dude. I got Gingy. I got a tub of Gingy juice right here. You sent me a whole bunch of tubs of them.
Yeah, maybe if Gingy can get him in the gym, he can fix his body.
Yeah, there's no chance, but yeah, but maybe, you know. All right, let's do like one or two more. Oh, this is actually really interesting. My team has a problem. We start really strong and tend to regress because as we get close to a kill, people start to press and try to do too much, and we end up regressing. What advice do you have to keep a more even keel and not regress? So I'd like to give my answer first.
Okay, I have a good answer
just
for that, so if yours lines up.
Yeah, well, this happens a lot in WoW because your expectations get higher and it can lead to morale problems. So let's just say, you know, your best pull is 25%. And then everything goes right for you. You don't really think about it in the moment, but the mechanics went on the right people at the right time, and you basically are only know enough about the fight to consistently maybe get a 20% pull, but you just get a 5% pull out of nowhere. That in your raiders' minds becomes the new expectation, and you expect to be reaching that every pull or close to it, and you consider anything else regression. But in reality, most phases aren't consistent until all 20 or most of the 20 players, since you have multiple one or two battle reses at that point, do not fully understand how to get through P2. So you're naturally going to be a little bit inconsistent in those phases, and you actually haven't learned them enough to consistently be at 20% or lower. And therefore, the natural thing is a lot of guilds get tricked by that low pull into thinking that's the new norm, when in reality it happened because of a lot of things going right that were pretty much lucky. And that can really affect your morale if you don't temper your expectations and still feel like you're learning something every pull. And yeah, it's basically my answer. And also one other side note is that I want you to answer at the end of it is something I've noticed too, is that we have a very good communication system in our guild. But every time we see the like last phase of a boss for the first time, a few of my raiders, it's usually like 2 to 3 at a time, get really excited, and my analogy for it is they put their cape, they go to their closet and put their cape on, and they all start calling every single mechanic they see because it's because they're excited, right? But they don't know that they're not helping. They're just they just want to say as much as possible because they're just really excited. So just both of those. Yeah.
Okay, I'm frantically finding this graphic that I've used in workshops about this.
Okay,
I think I found it. So, yeah, the problem is that people got to the phase they got to the result that you're describing because of the fundamentals, right? But like Max said, those fundamentals were learned right there in the last few sequence of pulls. They weren't learned like yesterday or the day before, so they're not really fully trained yet. They're there's still the bad version of that can happen along with the good one. It's not like the bad one has been pruned out of the brain in terms of reactions and seeing patterns. So you have a higher probability of getting there, but only slightly. So as a raid leader or as a culture, you should be understanding that motivation as an emotion drives your focus. And here this is where I want to show the graphic. I wonder if I can share your screen without messing it up. All right, I drew this. I'm not really good with digital art, so I just tend to draw stuff with markers for my seminars. But okay, so the brain works like if you can see right here that you have an opponent essentially, and when your competition is so you're running a race and the person is right in front of you, or you can feel them breathing over your shoulder, you have the maximum amount of externally forced motivation coming in, right? Whereas, and for that, you can use this competitive motivation where the actual thing that is driving you is the aspiration to beat that person. And your focus is wholly on that person, right? Or on this person. And your focus becomes the thing that drives you through the next action. Beating this person, you don't think about your running technique or whatever. You're thinking about getting in front of them, and you can do this amazing feat of strength where you like pass them, because you're like, you somehow dig deep into your aerobic engine and find a way to get there. When your opponent is really far in front of you or really far behind you, your competitive motivation is gone. It's evaporated. It's like nondescript. And so what you're running on is mastery motivation. The joy that you get out of like striding correctly or breathing correctly or going through the motions that you've trained yourself every day, all day. So when you're like going through the motions on a pull, you're like full in this mastery flow where you're like, like pre-pull, the pull timer goes and you're like really focused on like getting it perfect. And then, you're really focused on that first mechanic and whatnot. And you're in this mastery zone. But when you see blood in your eyes, when you see like the kill right there, your brain is like focused on the things that you're doing, like that kill. And you kind of are losing your focus on the good things you were doing to get to that point, which is like the mastery steps of like executing really well on the minor things, right? So as a raid leader, as a culture, you need to understand how to pull people back and forth between these two zones and how to utilize them. So as a raid leader, generally speaking, in WoW, you just want a chill flow all the way to the kill. You never get a benefit from like the high adrenaline focus that comes from focusing on a single variable. Like you get that in traditional sports a lot. You even get that in some esports like CSGO, for example, when you're like clutching 1v5 and you just need that focus on the crosshair and like your movement in this like 5 pixel area and that's it, like reaction speed and nothing else. Like this is beneficial. But I would say in World of Warcraft, this is almost never the case that you're driven by a single focal point. You need this like wide lens, wide angle kind of like view. So the way you get that is by like, after you have a really good pull, you immediately start downplaying it. You go in and be like, oh, like everything went right. This thing went on this guy. Really, really good job getting there, guys. But like, let's not forget the fundamentals that got us there. You play it down. Everybody jokes about it. Joke like the boss really wants to die. That's why he's throwing everything on the rogue or something. Or maybe it must have pissed him off. I don't know. And you use like these social aspects and these psychological aspects to drive the group focus back to like the fundamentals. And you even take a longer break during the pull, like Max does, where you go back and you look at the VOD and you're like, okay, the reason we got to this point was because you guys were doing like 100 more DPS out of the gate than normal. So your pre-pull was perfect, like the perfect execution on the first mechanic. Like we didn't use a battle res all the way until like P3. Or like, the third platform or something, or like, so you raise the importance of all these like micro things that people are doing. And then this blood kind of drains out of their eyes and they go back from competition phase into mastery phase of their motivation. So that is my,
that's awesome. I have almost no follow-up. That I feel like that makes a ton of sense. Cause like what can happen too is like you said, that just drawing it back to exactly what that person said was how your guild reacts to seeing that super low boss is about to die, boss could die next pull thing. You're so singularly focused on the things that are happening at the end of the fight that you almost just saw, or maybe you barely just saw. And then you can suffer regression because they're moved into that competition mode instead of the mastery of what got them there in the first place. Exactly. And that actually happens a lot less in top guilds, because I think the leadership structure and the amount of analysts and things you have available to you is a lot, to where you're pretty well learned on stuff like that.
Right.
But in mid-ranked, lower-ranked guilds, it's a plague. I've seen it so much on streams where someone will luck into a low pull, and then even their leadership is focused on just killing it right now, and they're so insanely hypercritical of mistakes that happen early or mid at that point, because they assume that they're solved when they never actually were in the first place.
They build the equation up.
Exactly. And it can ruin morale. I've seen a guild wipe at 1% when their previous pull was at 12%, and they didn't even see the last phase for the rest of the night, and their raid leader was just absolutely berating people for making mistakes, right? So and again, the whole that just comes down to leadership style. There is successful leadership where people are very in your face, right? And it's very aggressive, but at least it's like, the military is a good example, right? Like military leadership, at least American military, where I feel like for me, the berating's the wrong word to use, but even aggressively telling a really, really like top tier player that they made a mistake, they already, if they have the right mindset in your guild, they already know they made a mistake and they're already working on it. calling it out in the sense of being like making sure you as a raid leader know the problem is solved is just it is often just a simple yes or no question with that player, which is what you'd ideally like, oh yeah, I did this is how it'll work next time. But when you start approaching that conversation as like what you said earlier, when you're not viewing a mistake as a constructive problem to solve, but you're viewing a mistake as someone who's holding you and your friends back, that's when that relationship can be kind of broken for a long time. If someone does not respect you to where you're asking them the question to solve a problem and they see it as an adversarial response, then that's when I think morale can take a hit pretty quick. When you don't have, good.
It's a challenge because like what you're describing is exactly what works for cutting edge. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean cutting edge in the World of Warcraft term. I meant like elite performers. But like I imagine a lot of people are in like guilds where like they don't have any expectation that the person who made the mistake is going to get any better in the next pull or even cares.
Correct.
And so then you're thinking like, what can I as a raid leader do to like influence this? And I would say like you should always ask yourself first, what is your motivation? Is your motivation to like look bigger or appear better or like, make a point or like maybe raise morale by confronting this person? Like maybe that's what you need to do, right? Or do you want to change that person's behavior? And if you want to change that person's behavior, then you need to ask, what is the thing that they need to hear to change? Not what is the thing that you want to say? And then they might change. So you as a raid leader need to get to know a little bit the defective people whose behavior you want to change, and you need to figure out what it is that person needs to hear to modify their behavior on a pull-by-pull basis versus the thing that you really want to say that maybe other people would want to say too to their face, that actually won't change the behavior.
It won't change their behavior at all. In fact, it could make it worse, right?
Yeah.
So
if you're set on having them in your guild and you're set on and you don't need to confront them for the purposes of group morale, let's say, and you do want their behavior to change, then you have to have a hard conversation with yourself that you like the thing that you say to them might privately be like kind of manipulative, but like the purpose is like you're saying the thing that they need to hear rather than the thing that you want to say. Just think of it that way. Yeah.
All right, and then we probably have time for about one more. Some of these have kind of fallen off of the good topic, but
there's so many good questions. I apologize to everybody who did type in chat. There was one I had highlighted and I lost it. Let me see if I can go up. It's not a very good last question, but Aurori Claire asked how to go the distance in 12 to 16 hours of training so you don't lose concentration too early. You can't. If you're going to be fully concentrating before, you don't want to conserve it. You want to use it as heavily as you can, and then you just want to refill the battery. Just go do some meditation, go on a walk, take a break and eat some food, restock your glucose, like the things you would do to concentrate, and just use it up and then quit when you know that you're totally done.
And then I think I do have a good last question. From a mental and physiological standpoint, how does age affect elite gaming?
I think age affects elite gaming most monetarily. So like you saw this in League, you saw a bunch of people quit when they hit their like mid-20s because their peers were setting themselves up much more successfully for life with the time that they were committing. Like you had to play like 365 days a year, 12 hours a day, and you were being paid like $80K a year. And so everybody was quitting. Then salaries doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled. And now you can make like, $400K or $1 million. And then people came back, started playing again. So reaction speed doesn't start slowing until you hit age like 26. Male reaction speed and female reaction speed peak around 23 to 26. That's like your physically like finished brain and body, essentially. And then after that, if you do not train, it declines like pretty steadily. But if you have trained reflexes or trained competitive sport behaviors, then it sustains pretty standardly up until you're 40 years old, at which point then you can start to have like more rapid decline from 40 to 50, which is like, which you can still, you have to modify your training regime a lot of times. In traditional sport, we know that you have to like do extra training here to like keep reaction speed high. And then once you're over like late 40s or 50s, then there's like irreversible or unstoppable neurodegenerative decline of reaction speed. That means like you actually will be slower than other people. But I would say up until about your mid 40s, like you have a fighting chance of like being fast enough to compete. So then it's just a question of like how much time do you want to spend? And like a 16-year-old who can spend 10 hours 7 days a week on a game just is going to have more opportunity to train than somebody who's like has a kid or a girlfriend and a job.
Absolutely.
And like you have like, 3 hours and then sometimes on the weekends, So it's just literally about the value of your time. And that's really what happens is generally your pursuit in the real world becomes like unfortunately necessary in terms of like your revenue to sustain your life. So
I think that's really interesting too, because we're never going to know how late a gamer can play at the highest level in the really, really popular high octane esports right now, like League, Valorant, CSGO, things like that. Like the ones with all the hype with a lot. I think, obviously with the popularity of games comes players, right? There's a reason in the United States that like there's a ton of talent in sports that are really popular versus like, sports that are less popular, because just among the crop of talented athletes as kids, they're going to obviously train and grow up because they want to go pro in this game that they love and is more popular, right? That's why those games seeming to make the gap larger between talent or skill level in sports rather than make it closer in certain markets. And the same thing happens in esports, where the kids that have been playing games on an iPad since they were 5 years old, and like the Fortnite Zoomers, those kids are just starting to grow up right now. So the people who are old in the industry, I guess, so like, I guess what like most people would consider old in like League or Valorant or CSGO would be probably nearing 30 now, would be like kind of like the outer edge of that. And we don't know, because those people aren't growing up with the same thing. Those people, we were playing, we were playing games before it made money, before they were esports. We were playing them for fun. And for a lot of people that age, they didn't even really come out or were advanced until they were, almost adults, where these kids are playing fully advanced versions of these games when they're children. So they're like, obviously the scope and the ceiling of how good they can be when they grow up and they reach their peak is obviously higher. So I think you're going to see a lot of people around their 30s right now, regardless of their skill level, naturally are going to be replaced most likely by these kids getting older in a lot of games. So it's going to be when this generation of kids, I think, reaches that age to where you might see someone like, Faker being good enough to play until he's like 35 or something, right? Where I don't think you're going to see that with this current generation just because of the different ways we grew up. And then also maybe a stigma within the gaming community of a lot of teams wanting to ride that wave and being much more willing to replace a very, very, practically good mid laner who's 30 with this super talented Korean import.
We have this prodigy fetish where like we like people who are as good as somebody else but younger, because we're like, oh, if he's good as that person but he's younger than him, that means he'll be better when he's like older. He'll improve. He has a ceiling still, whereas the other person's been as good as they are for 6 years. So I think there's also the fact that like the first crop of gamers who are like really good at a game before it's like super popular, a lot of them are going to get filtered out by upcoming pros because they got lucky, right? They got good at a game, not because they were good learners and good competitors, but because they were like up there and they were first. But the game that they got good at is not the game that is not going to stay that way now, because now it's a pro game, and so it's iterating constantly. Like you have to be so good at Fortnite now. It's compared to like the first year it came out, it's like unbelievably how different the game is, right? And what your skill is. And like those people, half of those people will just fall off because they're like, wait, this isn't the game that I learned. This isn't the game.
And then some of them obviously were the people that happened to be really, really, really talented and were also there when it came out, right? But then you'll see a lot of people that were there at the top because there wasn't as much sample size of players.
Right. But yeah, if you are good because you're an autodidactic learner who just like automatically can learn from playing, you were raised really well, your parents nailed it from the ages of 3 to 7, just completely parented you perfectly, you have like decently good diet and genetics, and you like are good at video games, and you also reflect and you have a system and you set goals and you like, review your VODs and you like have the model of where you want to be and you have a mirror so that you can like see your own play. Then there's no reason you can't compete all the way until you're like mid-40s, unless something happens that makes you abnormal, like some sort of disease or something.
Or if like the gaming industry changes and now in 20 years it's all VR based, so the best gamers are the ones that like have these just insane actually athletic reflexes, like now being relevant. Yeah, exactly, being relevant in gaming, which that would be one hell of a world. Although I'm still not fully on the VR is the future train yet. I still feel like it has like so many problems. But okay, I think that's pretty much it. That was, first of all, that was fascinating. I'm so glad I did this. And I definitely want to keep in touch with you if I can to like ask you questions about stuff, because I think about this kind of stuff all the time. And this was really, really nice. I'm glad you reached out.
I'm excited that World of Warcraft is developed. Like the work that you have done to put RWF on the map means that like I it's kind of like coming home to a game, and like the thing that I left is there now. Like I left World of Warcraft because like I could build a career in StarCraft and League of Legends, but like now I come back and it's like, here it is. Like there's M+ and there's PvP and well, I don't know that there really is. The viewership is pretty low on that. I'm sorry, MDI, but anyway, the point is that like there's these skill-based expressions in World of Warcraft, and it's beautiful to see people optimizing them and trying to be the best in the world at it. With the way that you guys are. So I think that the sky's the limit for how much fun we can have with sports psychology and optimizing things in World of Warcraft. Let's keep in touch. Hit me up if you have any questions. Sorry for the people who we didn't get to answer. You can just tweet at me. I have a podcast that's literally a Q&A podcast. It's the Ask Weldon Show. I've been doing it for like 5 years, so you can just call in your questions anytime you want to that, and I listen to the recording of your question and I answer it. So yeah, the link to the podcast is on Anchor. I think you can find it if you go on my Twitter and just kind of like scroll around.
Yeah, I linked your Twitch and Twitter in the chat. If anyone wants to follow you on either platform or anything else you want to plug in there, that would be great.
Yeah, I stream the podcast live for that 45 minutes, but I otherwise don't have much of a streaming presence. I mostly just post it up on YouTube because I have 4 kids, and so my days are taken up a lot with work than streaming. Maybe in the future, we'll see. But YouTube is the place to go for my podcast. And hopefully I can do stuff with other World of Warcraft professionals and get other perspectives. I know we dealt a lot with raiding here, and I would be curious to talk to people about Mythics and PvP at some point, because I'm sure that there's a lot of overlap and some really key differences in sports psychology applied to them.
All right, sounds good. So thank you for coming on. I will look forward to reaching out with you in the future. That sounds great.
Yep. Have a good one. Have a good
time
in Final Fantasy today.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, see you later. All right, bye.